Chapter 1832. After jogging home, Gunyanji went to the bathroom to take a shower and tidy her hair. She dried her hair with the hairdryer while talking to Hua Xiaoheng, who was leaning against the bathroom door. I met Rhinus today. I said I was interested in the security system of the computer database. He asked me to go to the Metropolitan Museum tomorrow to show me a company's database security system. Hua Xiaoheng's eyes narrowed. The New York Metropolitan Museum? Yes, is there a problem? Gunyanji finished drying her hair and turned to look at him. Hua Xiaoheng thought of something and turned to Gunyanji. Change your clothes and come out for dinner. I have something to ask CEO Lu. Lu Yuan was checking his email on the computer in the living room. He was still the president of the Lu Corporation, so he couldn't be like Lu Jin, who didn't care about anything. He still had to reply to work emails. Hua Xiaoheng sat down beside him and suddenly asked, "Did you send a coordinate signal to your phone at the Metropolitan Museum in New York?" Lu Yuan's hand paused. He looked up at him and replied, "What's wrong? Did you get any inspiration from decoding the signal?" Lu Jin said that decoding the signal can find the law and frequency of magnetic resonance, which will help you get in touch with us. Unfortunately, before we could get in touch, Nianji was kidnapped. Hua Xiaoheng had long guessed that it had something to do with Lu Yuan. Now that he had confirmed it, he felt much more at ease. He said, "No wonder we received the signal and found traces of an abnormal magnetic field, but it quickly disappeared. We don't have enough magnetic field energy storage. It's impossible to send this kind of enlightening signal without limit." Lu Yuan closed the computer and couldn't help but think of Song Jining. After pondering for a while, he finally asked, "Who received the signal?" Hua Xiaoheng turned his head away calmly. "Miss Song." Lu Yuan's emotions surged when he heard the address. The images of the two of them interacting in the past flashed through his mind. They were like pencil drawings outlined by ink lines, both clear and illusory. His self-control was extremely strong. Even if he missed her, he wouldn't indulge himself. Without batting an eyelid, he stood up and walked to the window looking out at Central Park. Early summer was approaching, and the tender green leaves had just climbed up the branches. As far as the eye could see, it was all lush green. After a while, Lu Yuan turned around and looked at Hua Xiaoheng, who was even calmer than him. The corners of his mouth twitched. "Did Miss Song send you here?" Hua Xiaoheng didn't raise his head to look at Lu Yuan. The corners of his lips curled up slightly and he nodded. There was a hint of pride in his deep and magnetic voice. "Of course it's Miss Song. Madame Song is the only one who can decipher the two magnetic field codes left by Gu Xiangwen." Lu Yuan recalled the stunning young girl from back then. Not only was she extremely intelligent, but she was also beautiful and moving. It was just that she was a little slow when it came to relationships. He raised his head and smiled. Several years of time flashed past his mind. The autumn swan has faith, and the spring dream has no trace. There was an indescribable sense of peace and tranquility in the living room. Gunyanji walked over with her hair up and looked at the two of them in confusion. "What are you guys talking about?" Her soft and delicate voice was like the early summer wind blowing through the treetops. Hua Xiaoheng's throat tightened and he felt a little hot. He also stood up and pulled out the chair next to him. "Come sit down. Let's demonstrate tomorrow's operation." Gunyanji was elated. "Sure. I've been doing well these past few days, haven't I?" Her big eyes suddenly lit up, and her face was filled with, "Please praise me." Hua Xiaoheng gently scratched her straight and exquisite little nose. "It's not bad. You barely passed." "Huh. I had to use all my strength to pass." "Major General Hua, aren't you being too strict?" Gunyanji felt that Lu Yuan was a little depressed, so she deliberately made an exaggerated joke to make him happy. Lu Yuan turned around and leaned against the windowsill of the bay window. He smiled as he watched Gunyanji and Hua Xiaoheng act shamelessly. Hua Xiaoheng rubbed her head. His fingers gently touched the soft skin of her cheek, and he felt as if he had been electrocuted. Looking away calmly, Hua Xiaoheng turned on Lu Yuan's laptop and began to demonstrate for her. The scene was a little dazzling and familiar. The decades of time in front of him seemed to have disappeared, and he had returned to the time he spent with that young girl. The two of them didn't spend much time alone, and it was all for business, but every minute and second was precious. Lu Yuan pursed his lips and walked out of the living room. The weather the next day wasn't very good. It often rained in New York in early summer, and April and May were when it rained the most. Gunyanji held an umbrella with Monet's most famous painting of the Lotus Pond and walked towards the New York Metropolitan Museum. The museum was also near Central Park, not far from Gunyanji's apartment. It was within walking distance. Reinitz wore a long black raincoat and stood upright on the steps of the museum. He held a black computer bag in one hand as his gaze scanned the crowd. His blonde hair, blue eyes, and handsome and tall appearance were too eye-catching among the ordinary tourists. From time to time, bold girls would go over to strike up a conversation, trying to get his contact information. Reinitz calmly used German to say that he didn't understand English. Not long after, he saw that unique umbrella, as well as the woman smiling sweetly under the umbrella. She looked up at him on the steps. Her starry eyes were the most dazzling scenery on a rainy day. Reinitz immediately put on his most perfect smile and walked down the steps gracefully. He reached out his hand to her. "Did you have a good journey? It's raining today. I should have picked you up, but you didn't want to." He spoke English with a perfect British accent. The girls who had been rejected by him saying that he didn't understand English were speechless. Gunyenji switched the umbrella with her other hand and quietly avoided Reinitz's outstretched hand. She smiled and nodded. "I live very close, so there's no need to go through so much trouble." Her gaze fell directly on the computer bag in Reinitz's hand. "This is what you wanted to show me?" Reinitz took Gunyenji's umbrella and defused the awkwardness. "Go in, I'll take you to a good place." Gunyenji had never been to the museum before. Although it was very famous for a child on the internet, looking at someone else's illustrated travel notes was basically a tour. So even though she had never been here before, she was no stranger to the layout and exhibits. She followed Reinitz into the museum and kept walking until they reached a corner that was rarely visited by tourists. Reinitz turned around with a smile and winked at her. "Come, sit here. I brought you here because this is the most comfortable sofa in the entire museum." Gunyenji was speechless. She looked up at her surroundings. It turned out that this was Lehman's art gallery, which housed the famous paintings that Mr. Lehman had collected throughout his life. Gunyenji looked at the biography of the person next to the oil painting, and her mood became even more complicated. This person was actually the founder of the largest investment bank, Lehman Brothers, which had been destroyed by her father, Lu Jin. Reinitz didn't know what Gunyenji was thinking. He saw her staring blankly at the oil painting hanging in front of her and said, "This is a portrait of Princess de Broye, the proud work of the neoclassical master Anger." He looked at the oil painting, then at Gunyenji. He smiled and whispered in her ear, "Compared to you, she's just a maid. You're the princess." He teased. "I'm your attendant." Gunyenji came back to her senses and smiled. "You're really joking. She's a real princess and I'm not a princess. Besides, I can't afford an attendant like you." Reinitz laughed at her retort and didn't continue to pester her. He sat down on the sofa and turned on the computer. "Come, let me show you my computer database security system." Gunyenji keenly caught on to his words. "Your computer database security system? Didn't you say it was a company's computer database? Is this company yours?" The corners of Reinitz's mouth twitched. He thought to himself that this girl really couldn't be underestimated. She was really too sharp. He accidentally let it slip and she caught on to it. However, this aroused his fighting spirit even more. It's only fun to be evenly matched, right? This is the second update of the day, Chapter 1821, The Princess and the Attendant. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. P.S. Thank you, only reading makes people happy in life, for the 60,000 Chidian coins yesterday. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1833. Reinitz smiled slightly. His sparkling eyes were like the blue sky that had been washed by rain. They were extremely moving. His voice was clear and he chuckled in a low voice. "You can say that, but this company isn't mine. I'm just a member of it." Gunyenji had a look of admiration in her eyes. "Arasagriat. You're so great." Reinitz simply gave her the laptop mouse. "Play by yourself." "Will it be too difficult? What if I don't understand it?" Gunyenji appropriately acted like a novice. She hesitantly took the mouse from Reinitz's hand and randomly clicked on his computer. Reinitz crossed his legs and sat in the corner of the sofa. He rested one hand on the back of the sofa and supported his head with the other. He stared at Gunyenji's profile and hair with a smile. He regretfully discovered that today was another day he couldn't pull out his hair. This was because Gunyenji had changed her headscarf. It was still a Hermes silk scarf that wrapped her hair tightly. However, she had tied a small bow on the left side of her head, making her face look small and playful. He didn't notice that Gunyenji had quickly connected to the Metropolitan Museum's Wi-Fi and was looking at all kinds of root directory files on his computer. She had also quietly opened the back door and let Lu Jin, who was lurking on the internet, in. When Reinitz came back to his senses, he glanced at the computer screen and saw that Gu Nianji had opened many programs. He couldn't help frowning. "What are you looking for?" "The database," Gu Nianji said confidently. "I can't find it no matter how hard I try." Reinitz leaned over to take a look and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He curled his index finger and gently tapped Gu Nianji's forehead. He said softly, "Little idiot." As he spoke, he found the database connection system for her and opened it for her to click in to observe. This database system was a branch system of the German Federal Intelligence Agency. However, anyone who used a database knew that the so-called branch system was only a difference in name. In fact, they were all connected to each other. Otherwise, why would it be called a database? It was like storing goods in different warehouses and eventually integrating them into a large system. However, without a key, it was impossible to integrate these warehouses stored in different locations. Gu Nianji curiously looked at the structure menu inside and asked some very basic questions about databases from time to time. Reinitz was quite attentive. He answered her questions one by one and gave her all kinds of demonstrations. Gu Nianji finally asked about the key, out of curiosity. Reinitz didn't tell her the answer directly. He just smiled and said, "In 2 days there will be an opera called The Lion King on Broadway. Would it be possible for Miss Gu to come and watch the opera with me?" He added, "When the time comes I'll tell you in detail the rules and logic behind how we set the keys." Gu Nianji thought to herself. She didn't want to explore all the information about the German Federal Intelligence Service, but she really wanted to figure out the pattern of their keys. She felt that the key settings of the same organization in both worlds should be the same. Even if it was not exactly the same, the rules and logic must be the same. But she didn't agree immediately. She stammered, "But I might not be free in 2 days. Also, the key sounds very difficult. I have such a poor foundation now, I won't be able to understand it even if I listen." "I guarantee you will understand." Reinitz patted his chest as a guarantee. In order to pique Gu Nianji's interest, he taught her a lot more basic knowledge about the keys and used their branch's database system as a demonstration. One spoke and one listened and they both lost track of time. They only snapped back to reality when the museum staff informed them that it was closing. Gu Nianji smiled and said, "Listening to you is better than studying for 10 years. Thank you, Mr. Reinitz." "You're welcome. It's my honor to be able to serve a princess like you," Reinitz said warmly. He immediately took advantage of the situation and invited again. "In 2 days there will be an opera called The Lion King on Broadway. May I have the honor of inviting Miss Gu?" Gu Nianji finally smiled and nodded. "I also like The Lion King." This Disney cartoon had once been the bridge between her and her father. Reinitz's lips curled up, revealing 2 very cute little dimples. It was already evening when they left the Metropolitan Museum. The rain had long stopped and the street lamps on the side of the road were lit up. Not far away the sky was a dark blue. The skyline of Manhattan was filled with high-rise buildings. The setting sun passed through the forest-like buildings and finally slowly descended below the horizon. Reinitz insisted on sending Gu Nianji back to the luxury apartment in Central Park. It wasn't far and they arrived after strolling a few blocks. Gu Nianji held an umbrella and smiled. "Thank you so much for today. I learned a lot." Reinitz smiled and bowed. "It's my honor." They then agreed on a time and place to go to the opera, and Reinitz took the opportunity to set up a chance to have dinner with Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji didn't agree immediately this time. She said hesitantly, "I'm only staying in New York for a few days. After the opera I'll be going back. I still have work to do when I get back." Reinitz's heart skipped a beat and he smiled. "That's fine. Then let's have dinner together on the day of the opera." "But won't that be too late?" Gu Nianji said uneasily. "I have to be home before 10 p.m. "What a good girl," Reinitz said as he reached out to touch her head. Gu Nianji quietly tilted her head and avoided it. She said angrily, "Mr. Reinitz, we don't know each other that well, do we? Why are you always so interested in my head?" "Really?" Reinitz retracted his hand and smiled. "You're so cute. When you smile you remind me of the kitten at my house in Berlin." Gu Nianji. She stopped smiling and glanced at him indifferently. She walked gracefully up the steps and into the lobby of the apartment. Reinitz knew that Gu Nianji was unhappy, but he wasn't angry. He smiled as he watched her back disappear into the brown revolving glass door before turning to leave. Gu Nianji returned to Lu Yuan's apartment. As soon as she entered, she saw Lu Yuan, Lu Jin, and Hua Xiaoheng looking up at her in the living room. Gu Nianji smiled and put the umbrella in the small cupboard by the door. She changed into her slippers and said, "Are you guys lining up to welcome me?" Lu Jin winked and said, "Nianji, the way you and Reinitz look at the computer together is really a good match." Hua Xiaoheng, how was it a good match? Lu Yuan sensed Hua Xiaoheng's displeasure and deliberately smiled. Actually, they don't really match. Black-haired and black-eyed people are the best match. Black-haired and black-eyed people can't have blonde and blue-eyed children. Hua Xiaoheng, it was getting more and more ridiculous. Gu Nianji held back her laughter so much that she was about to tremble. She quickly said, "President Lu can ask my dad for advice about heredity." She then nodded at Hua Xiaoheng to appease him. She then looked at Lu Jin and quickly asked, "Dad, did you get into Reinitz's computer? Did you find anything good?" Lu Jin shook his head. Reinitz is very cautious. There's not much content on his computer, and the database is also a common item. The key is that we don't know the key, so we can't get to the headquarters from his database branch. Gu Nianji sat down beside him and said, "Reinitz said that he'll talk to me about the rules and logic of their department's keys in 2 days. Do you think I should go?" "That's great. What did he say?" Gu Nianji repeated what Reinitz had told her this afternoon about the keys. Of course, Reinitz didn't mention the specific rules and logic. Lu Jin fell into deep thought after hearing this. Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Yuan looked at each other and said to Gu Nianji, "Nianji, come to the study." Gu Nianji followed them into the study. With Lu Jin around, Lu Yuan and Hua Xiaoheng didn't have to spend time on the keys. They had more important things to do. Hua Xiaoheng sat down on the desk. He crossed his arms and stretched his long legs. He said in a low voice, "Reinitz asked you to go to the opera in 2 days. Gu Nianji nodded. "You already know." This time, her umbrella was specially made with a miniature webcam on it. Lu Yuan frowned and said, "According to my observations over the past few days, Lohler has transferred a large sum of money to Reinitz." Hua Xiaoheng continued, "Reinitz has also mobilized a lot of people. In 2 days they're going to make a move no matter what." "Are you sure?" Gu Nianji asked in confusion. "Are you sure that they're going to make a move based on these 2 points? Also, the research results of Lohler's lab have been questioned by the authorities. Lohler needs to disclose a portion of the research information within a certain period of time. So we think that they can't wait any longer." Lu Yuan sat on the sofa and held a cup of tea. He smiled and said, "Also, Lohler has already tricked Wen Shuyi over." Gu Nianji, Wen Shuyi is so cunning. How did Lohler trick her? Gu Nianji was very curious. Lu Yuan was amused by her and laughed. "Everyone has a weakness. As long as we find her weakness, it won't be difficult to trick her." Hua Xiaoheng also smiled and said, "Lohler promised her greater development and made her the vice president of the legal department of the Lohler Corporation." Gu Nianji gasped. "The VP of the legal department of the Lohler Corporation. This temptation is indeed irresistible to Wen Shuyi. Wen Shuyi is most looking forward to personal success in her career. This is probably her ultimate goal," Lu Yuan said humorously. "Lohler is also very good at psychological warfare. But I remember that when Shuyi's passport was confiscated." Gu Nianji thought of something else. "She can't go abroad? You have to thank your brother He for that." Hua Xiaoheng smiled and said, "President Lu asked him to cooperate and he agreed. He acquiesced to Wen Shuyi looking for ways to get her passport back after spending a lot of money. Her plane will arrive tomorrow." Lu Yuan laughed. "There'll be a good show to watch then. So from the analysis of various phenomena, we think that the opera performance in 2 days will be when they make their move." Gu Nianji's eyes lit up. "What will they do then?" Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Yuan shook their heads together. "Reinitz is in charge of this. We can't eavesdrop. Reinitz himself was an expert in this field. Eavesdropping on him was probably only a little easier than eavesdropping on Hua Xiaoheng. Even when Lu Jin entered Reinitz's computer through the back door today, he didn't find anything useful." Hua Xiaoheng's expression gradually became serious. "Nianji, think about it carefully. It might be extremely dangerous in 2 days. Do you still want to go?" This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1822, Everyone Has a Weakness. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. At 8 p.m. the second update. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1834. Gu Nianji closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about the rules and logic of the key that she had yet to obtain, and the vast amount of information they had obtained from the other world. If they didn't have the key, how many years would it take for them to effectively use the information? Gu Nianji gritted her teeth and nodded heavily. I want to go. Their net is already set. If I don't go, will they let me go? Hua Xiaoheng looked at her deeply and patted her head. Okay, don't be too nervous. Reinitz's order was to capture you alive, so your life is temporarily safe. This was also an important reason why Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Yuan felt that Gu Nianji could participate and take a gamble. They didn't know the other party's specific plans, but they knew that the other party didn't want to kill Gu Nianji, so their chances of winning were much higher. Gu Nianji knew that the biggest reason she could deal with the other party was that the other party didn't want to kill her for the time being. It seemed like she was really important to Lorraine, Gu Nianji thought coldly in her heart. On the flight from the Huaxia Empire to New York in the United States, when Shuyi sat in first class and drank cordyceps soup elegantly. This wasn't her first time sitting in first class, but it was the happiest she had ever been. The plane arrived at New York's JFK airport, and she quickly got off the plane. She met the person sent by Lorraine, and under his lead she quickly cleared customs and left the airport. Sitting in the bulletproof extended Cadillac estate, when Shuyi looked back at the airport that was getting further and further away. She then looked at her watch. It was like a dream. She had already arrived at the highest point in the world and walked into the world of the old tycoons like Lorraine. And all of this, she silently touched her chest. It was all brought about by her genes. And her genes were given to her by her mother, Qin Yaoguang. When Shuyi's anger dissipated at this moment, and she no longer resented Qin Yaoguang for refusing to acknowledge her. She understood the principle that a man's wealth would make him guilty. Her entire body was a treasure. She was truly a treasure girl. The car arrived at the Lorraine family's mansion on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and the driver respectfully opened the door for her. When Shuyi craned her neck to take a look at the house, which had a sense of history but was maintained as if it was new, she sucked in a breath of cold air. To be able to live in such a large house on the Upper East Side of Manhattan was even more amazing than the He family's mansion on the second ring road of Huaxia Empire. The snow-white floor was decorated with many curved surfaces, so it didn't seem out of place. Instead, it displayed the Baroque architectural style everywhere. It was a low-key but arrogant way to flaunt one's wealth. When Shuyi was a little nervous. At that moment she lost her confidence. She nervously got out of the car and was led into Lorraine's house by two female housekeepers in black and white uniforms. The living room of Lorraine's mansion was also Baroque in style. This style of decoration was a test of the quality of the materials and soft decoration. A slight mistake would make it look cheap and cumbersome. The Lorraine family did not feel this way at all. All kinds of marble, gems, bronze, and even gold were fully used to decorate the spacious space. It didn't seem crowded, but it made people feel at a loss and they didn't even dare to breathe. When Shuyi almost held her breath before she was able to walk through the entrance with Rembrandt's famous painting, trembling with fear. Extravagant, this was too extravagant. When other rich people got their hands on a famous Rembrandt painting, they would carefully store it in the most secret safe in the bank. Unlike the Lorraine family who casually hung it on the wall at the entrance, just like ordinary people would buy a printed decorative painting that cost 10 yuan each. This was power. When Shuyi carefully looked at the oil paintings while she waited at the entrance and confirmed that they were all authentic. However, it was obvious that a family like Lorraine's did not need to hang fake prints on their front door. If the rich and powerful people saw it, wouldn't they laugh their heads off? That would be too degrading. When Shuyi's awe deepened. When she saw Lorraine's face, which she had seen on television before, she almost ran over and bowed to him. She said in fluent English, "Hello, Mr. Lorraine. Nice to meet you." Lorraine looked her up and down and smiled. "Miss Wen, right? You're finally here. I've been waiting for you for a long time." He warmly shook Wen Shuyi's hand and led her to sit down on the gold velvet sofa. After sitting down, Wen Shuyi saw that there was another man sitting in the corner of the sofa. The German had blonde hair and blue eyes. He looked at her silently, his gaze sharp and cold. Wen Shuyi's eyes flashed. Why was he here? Lorraine saw that Wen Shuyi had noticed Reinitz sitting in the corner of the sofa and introduced him. "This is my friend Reinitz." Then he said to Reinitz, "This is my most distinguished guest, Miss Wen Shuyi." Wen Shuyi nodded with a smile and started chatting with them. "Mr. Reinitz, right? Is he also from the Lorraine group?" Wen Shuyi asked as if they were already friends. She already thought of herself as a member of the Lorraine family. Lorraine laughed. "I want to. But what can I do if he doesn't want to?" He said implicitly, "Mr. Reinitz is a public official in Germany." He didn't say Reinitz's specific identity, but Wen Shuyi already understood. She glanced at Reinitz and ignored him. Instead she started chatting with Lorraine. Wen Shuyi was trying to please him, so their conversation was very pleasant. It could be said that both the host and the guest were very satisfied. After the small talk, Lorraine stood up with a smile. Miss Wen, it's your first time here. Have a good rest today. I've prepared a room for you on the second floor. The housekeeper will take you up in a bit. Wen Shuyi quickly stood up and nodded with a smile. Thank you, Mr. Lorraine, but I've already booked a hotel. It's fine. It's our group's long-term reservation at the hotel anyway. It doesn't matter if you don't stay or not. Lorraine smiled nonchalantly and said, the most famous opera on Broadway, The Lion King, will be on tomorrow. I hope Miss Wen will come. It can be considered a welcome dinner for you. Wen Shuyi was flattered and nodded repeatedly. Then it would be impolite to refuse. Thank you, Mr. Lorraine. As they spoke, the housekeeper had already arrived. He helped her carry her suitcase and took Wen Shuyi to the second floor. After Wen Shuyi left, Lorraine raised an eyebrow at Reinitz and said jokingly, How was it? I've taken care of things here. What about you? Isn't that lady a bit more difficult than Miss Wen? Reinitz stretched his long legs and smiled reservedly. We're not the same kind of people. It's not appropriate to compare. Lorraine didn't say much and nodded. As long as you know your limits. I'll see you at the Broadway Theater tomorrow. Reinitz nodded. The next evening, Reinitz ordered someone to drive to Gu Nianji's apartment to pick her up. She was wearing a custom-made pink Chanel pantsuit. She didn't have a headscarf on her head, but she seemed to have used hair oil. Her long hair was braided at the back of her head, making her delicate and lively face look a bit mature and beautiful. Reinitz's gaze swept over Gu Nianji's incredibly smooth hair bun. He thought to himself, this is even more troublesome than a headscarf. But thinking about it again, she was already his today. Why should he care about her hair? Reinitz smiled brightly and opened the car door for her. When they arrived at the entrance of the Broadway Theater, they took the VIP passageway to avoid the army in front of them and went straight to the private room on the second floor. The view was wide and separated from the people on both sides by the thick floor, so they wouldn't be disturbed. Gu Nianji sat on the comfortable and exquisite Rococo-style soft chair, feeling very relaxed. Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Yuan had already brought their men to infiltrate the theater. Lu Jin controlled the surveillance equipment inside and outside of the theater. Her Bluetooth headset could hear the sound of everyone contacting each other at all times. Gu Nianji was very at ease. She leisurely chatted with Reinitz and listened to him talk about the rules and logic of setting up the key in their bureau. This was the most important reason she had come today. Gu Nianji listened very carefully and smiled knowingly from time to time. She was so focused that she didn't see Wen Shuyi, who was in the private room on the third floor, observing the entire theater with binoculars. She was extremely surprised when she saw her and Reinitz whispering to each other. Mr. Lorraine, is that Mr. Reinitz over there? Wen Shuyi asked with her slender eyes. Yeah. Lorraine glanced at her with a smile. She was very impressed by Reinitz's ability to flirt with women. It had only been a few days and they were already so intimate. Then who's next to him? Wen Shuyi asked uneasily. She looks quite familiar to me. Don't you know her? Lorraine continued to smile. Don't tell me you don't know her? I know her, that's why I'm surprised. Wen Shuyi bit her lip, her heart churning. Lorraine raised an index finger to his lips and said mysteriously, then don't talk and don't disturb others. This is a fish that Reinitz spent a lot of time catching. Don't scare it away. Wen Shuyi's expression changed and she blurted out, it's over. You've fallen into a trap. She clearly knows Reinitz. She also knows his true identity. This was the second update of the day, Chapter 1823, The Most Distinguished Guest. A reminder to everyone for their monthly and recommendation votes. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1835. Lorraine's brows twitched as he wondered what was going on with Wen Shuyi. Did she know Reinitz's true identity? That was impossible. Reinitz's true identity was a top secret, and even the average CIA agent didn't know. Lorraine remembered that he had only mentioned that Reinitz was a friend and a German public official. He hadn't said anything else. Thus he calmly asked, what do you mean? What is Reinitz's true identity? Do you know something that I don't? Wen Shuyi regretted it so much that she wanted to bite her tongue. She groaned inwardly. How could she have gotten carried away and blurted this out? But seeing Gu Nianji sitting in the private room on the second floor, whispering to Reinitz and occasionally covering her face to hide her smile and putting on a pretentious act was too jarring. Lorraine saw Wen Shuyi staring in Gu Nianji's direction without speaking, so his expression darkened. Miss Wen, you're already a member of the Lorraine group. Do you still want to keep secrets from me, the chairman? When Shuyi composed herself and knew she had to be careful. Also, she didn't know what Reinitz's true identity was. What if it was different from the other side? But even if it was different, Gunyenji definitely recognized this person as Reinitz and was already on guard against him. No matter what Lorraine and Reinitz's plan was, it definitely wouldn't succeed. They didn't know that Gunyenji looked as cute and harmless as a white rabbit, but she was actually cunning and extremely intelligent. When Shuyi suddenly had an idea and felt like she had an obligation to remind Lorraine. This could be considered her proof of allegiance. She turned to look at Lorraine with a smile and blinked at him, fluttering her long and thick eyelashes. "Mr. Lorraine, did you forget what I used to do?" Lorraine was speechless. He didn't forget, he didn't even know. Who would care about what a lab rat used to do? Not to mention a lab rat that failed in an experiment and was abandoned in an orphanage. But Lorraine didn't show it at all. His smile remained elegant and calm as he said gently, "I'd like to hear the details." When Shuyi found a good excuse for herself and said vaguely, "I used to be the personal secretary of Major General Hijichu of the Wuxia Empire and was also a member of their secret forces. We have this Mr. Reinitz in our files. You should know his true identity better than me, right?" "Oh, really?" Lorraine looked at her doubtfully. "Can you be more specific? What's his real identity in your files?" When Shuyi raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You don't know? Mr. Lohler? Isn't he your friend?" "Yes, he's my friend. I also know that he's a public official in Germany. That's all." Lohler spoke flawlessly and repeated his introduction yesterday. When Shuyi came back to her senses and weighed the pros and cons in her mind, she decided to take a gamble and pretend that the Reinitz on this side had the same status as the Reinitz on the other side. If she was wrong, she could say that the Wuxia Empire's information was wrong. With that thought in mind, when Shuyi gathered her courage and said, "Mr. Lohler, to be honest with you, in the database of the Wuxia Imperial Secret Forces, this Mr. Reinitz is an elite agent of the German Federal Intelligence Agency. He's also the successor to the head of the agency, right?" Lohr's heart shuddered and his expression changed. Such a secret identity had actually been discovered by the Wuxia Empire. Then what about Gunyenji? How did she know? Lohler's voice grew anxious. When Shuyi's heart calmed down and she knew she had made the right bet. The smile on her face became even more relaxed as she said dryly, "She used to be Major General Hijichu's fiancée. Even I know that, so how could she not know?" Lohler's expression was uncertain. He didn't know whether to believe when Shuyi or not. When Shuyi saw this and rolled her eyes, she suggested, "How about this? You call Mr. Reinitz out first and tell him everything. That way he'll be prepared and won't be affected no matter what your plan is. Knowing yourself and your enemy is the only way to emerge victorious." Lohler couldn't sit still anymore. He quickly stood up and said, "I have to go out for a bit. Please wait a moment, Miss Wan." He left the private room and returned to his car. He closed all the windows and ordered the bodyguards to stand guard around the car while he began contacting Reinitz. Reinitz had just finished explaining the rules and logic of setting up the key to Gunyenji's game. Because Gunyenji was more meticulous and sensitive, Reinitz had to use all his skills to answer Gunyenji's endless questions. He spoke until he was thirsty. He picked up a bottle of Vita water and began to gulp it down. At that moment, the miniature Bluetooth headset he had hidden in his ear rang. Reinitz calmly accepted the call and coughed softly. Lohler heard the cough and knew the call had gone through. He immediately lowered his voice and said, "Oh no, Gunyenji is putting on an act. I just received news that she doesn't recognize you at all. She knows your true identity." Alarm bells went off in Reinitz's mind, but his expression didn't change at all. He quietly grunted to indicate he was listening. "I'm telling the truth. Our plan needs to change immediately. Our target has always been her, but not only is she not afraid, she's even pretending not to know you and approaching you step by step. If I'm not wrong, Gunyenji has someone backing her. I don't know what they're planning by letting her get close to us." Lohler's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. He had originally wanted to set up a trap to capture Gunyenji or even get a sample of her DNA. He never imagined that he would become someone else's prey. This feeling of the hunter becoming the hunted was so King terrible. Lohler muttered a curse and kicked the seat in front of him. Reinitz heard the beeping sound from his Bluetooth headset. The call was over. His expression froze and his cold eyes looked at Gunyenji, who was sitting next to him. Gunyenji felt a bit hot. She took out a pack of tissues from her pocket and gently pressed it against her forehead to dry the sweat bit by bit. Reinitz suddenly reached out with a smile. "Let me help you." Gunyenji's wrist silently circled around to avoid Reinitz's reaching hand. Reinitz slowly withdrew his hand and took a sip of his Vita water. He smiled and said, "Miss Gu, have you been to Germany before?" Gunyenji shook her head. "No, I rarely go abroad." She then asked curiously, "Why would Mr. Reinitz ask that? Do I look like someone who has been to Germany before? I don't even speak German." Actually, she did. She had practiced her spoken German quite well. Reinitz smiled meaningfully and leaned very close to her to whisper in her ear, "But I feel like old friends with Miss Gu at first sight. If Miss Gu hasn't been to Germany before, then maybe my feeling is wrong." "Feeling like old friends at first sight doesn't mean we've met before." Gunyenji patiently explained to Reinitz the meaning of the idiom, "feeling like old friends at first sight." It means that meeting for the first time feels like an old friend. This is fate. She felt something was wrong after she finished speaking, but didn't think too much about it. She was secretly on guard as her eyes wandered around the audience to search for familiar figures. However, Hua Xiaoheng and the others hid themselves so well that Gunyenji didn't notice any of them. They were the two people she was familiar with. She didn't care and looked at the stage. "The opera is starting, right?" Reinitz nodded, and a hint of ruthlessness flashed across his eyes. He said dryly, "It's starting right away." As soon as he finished speaking, the lights in the theater dimmed. Reinitz looked down silently and took out his phone to send out a few commands. At that moment, Lorraine had already returned to his private room on the third floor and returned to his normal self. He told Wen Shuyi about the company's situation with a smile on his face and expressed his sincere joy at her arrival. Wen Shuyi understood that Lorraine must have gone out to rearrange his men to deal with Gunyenji. She was indescribably happy. She chatted happily with Lorraine and had her own unique insights in all aspects. Lorraine secretly nodded and thought that Wen Shuyi was indeed a talent. No wonder she had the closest perfect genes. After the lights in the theater dimmed, the two of them didn't speak anymore and looked towards the stage. At that moment, only the direction of the stage was lit up in the entire theater. On the set board, the vast Central African prairie was majestic and magnificent. It looked real and made everyone feel as if they were there. A red sun rose from the set board, a waterfall flowed down, eagles soared in the sky, and the snow-capped mountains in the distance were faintly discernible. Tall giraffes, jubilant cheetahs, running antelopes, and zebras swept past the screen one by one. Then the theme music of The Lion King began. The heavenly voice echoed in the theater, and everyone's emotions were stirred up. Hua Xiaoheng, who was sitting in the audience, as well as Lu Jin and Lu Yuan, who were sitting in the private room, were instantly attracted by the scene and singing. A tall man with oil paint on his face and a long scepter in his hand walked onto the stage and chanted, "Circle Ofaf." He raised his scepter towards the auditorium on the first floor. Da-da-da-da. Fire and bullets suddenly shot out from his scepter. This wasn't a scepter at all, but an AK-47. The people in the theater froze for a moment, and then there was an earth-shattering scream from the audience. "Help! Help!" Everyone shouted, and no one knew how many audience members had fallen into pools of blood. There was no shelter in the audience on the first floor, so everyone only had time to hide under their seats and shiver. Gunyenji was so shocked that she jumped up from her seat and rushed to the window of the private room. She watched as the man pulled the trigger without hesitation and slaughtered the unarmed audience. The security guard of the theater rushed in when he heard the gunshots, but he was knocked down by the man's bullets. Then two of his accomplices, dressed in the same attire, stood in the east and west corners of the theater with guns and continued to shoot at the crowd. Reinitz hugged Gunyenji from behind and said loudly, "You're crazy. Are you standing at the window as a target? Run for your life." As he spoke, he ignored Gunyenji's struggles and carried her out of the private room and ran to the back door. This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1824, The Hunter Becomes the Prey. A reminder for the monthly votes and recommendation votes. At 8 p.m. the second update. Moi, big shots, little angels. Chapter 1836. Gunyenji's mind immediately recalled how she had been chased like a stray dog in the Alps of the other world. In the end, she had fallen into Reinitz's hands. She had clearly recognized him this time, but she had still been caught off guard by the same thing. What had gone wrong in the middle? However, this thought only flashed through her mind and didn't linger on it for long. This time she had come prepared. If the other party's trap of the same nature still worked, she could go and die. Gunyenji suddenly took out a bottle of spray from her pocket and sprayed it at Reinitz's face. This wasn't the anti-wolf spray she had used on the black man the last time, but an anesthetic gas that could work quickly. Reinitz held Gu Nianji with both hands and didn't have a chance to deal with her. He didn't have time to hold his breath and accidentally inhaled a little anesthetic gas. He instantly felt his hands and feet go weak, and he fell before he even reached the parking lot. Gu Nianji held her breath and rolled away from his shackles. She looked up and saw that she was in an empty practice room. There were doors in the front and back, and it seemed like she could get out from the back door. She quickly put on a mask and ran to the back door. In the lobby of the theater, Hua Xiaoheng was sitting in the audience. As soon as he saw that the singer on the stage was acting strangely, he had already crawled under his seat. He calmly took out the equipment he had on him and quickly assembled a small pistol. These equipment were all specially made by Lu Jin. They were made of special plastic that could prevent ordinary security checks. Lu Yuan, who was sitting in the private room on the second floor, didn't stay idle either. He assembled his weapon and raised his hand to fire a shot at the electric circuit inside the theater. The second shot hit the wiring of the stage lamps. There was a burst of crackling sounds. It was like fireworks were being set off on the stage. The colored lights burst into sparks one by one and then extinguished. Only the hand of the AK-47 in the middle of the stage was still firing, and it was the only bright spot. Hua Xiaoheng rose slightly from under his seat, raised his hand and pulled the trigger at the place where the fire was coming from. Bang! The bullet went straight through the barrel of the AK-47. The AK-47 that was shooting violently was a relatively old assault rifle, commonly known as a submachine gun. It was the submachine gun that had killed the most people in the world. This gun was developed by the Soviet Union's weapons experts. It was called the AK-47, and the 47 actually referred to the year it was developed. However, although it was powerful, it also had obvious shortcomings. For example, the barrel was not long, and the aiming baseline was also very short. It could only be used in close combat, and shooting accuracy could not be guaranteed beyond 300 meters. Hua Xiaoheng knew it was an AK-47 the moment he heard the gunshot, so he aimed and fired without hesitation. The gunshots on the stage stopped in an instant, followed by a loud explosion. The scepter in the man's hand ignited into a fireball, directly blasting a hole in the man's heart. That person fell to the ground with a loud thud, no longer shooting wildly at the crowd. His accomplices, who were standing in the other two directions, were shocked. They had never seen this kind of play before. In that moment of shock, Hua Xiaoheng raised his hand and calmly fired a second shot like a cheetah aiming at its prey. Bang! The gun barrel in the hands of the gunner standing on the east side exploded, and a ball of fire immediately surrounded him. Hua Xiaoheng immediately turned his hand and fired a third shot. The gunner standing on the west side didn't have time to throw away the gun in his hand, and the barrel of the gun exploded. Similarly, a burst of sparks engulfed him and he also became a man of fire. In the dark theater, only 3 fires could be seen burning fiercely, like human-shaped torches. The people in the theater had survived the disaster. When they realized that the 3 gunners' guns had exploded for no reason and killed themselves, they all knelt on the ground and began to cry and pray, thanking God for saving them. Hua Xiaoheng, Lu Jin's panicked voice came from the Bluetooth headset. Quick! Nianji has been kidnapped by Reinitz. Hua Xiaoheng immediately said, "Location." His calm and steady voice was very imposing, and Lu Jin's panic was instantly soothed. After calming himself down, Lu Jin found Gu Nianji's location and told Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng put on his infrared night vision glasses and looked around. He found the direction to the back door. The people in the theater were all kneeling in front of their seats. Fortunately, they didn't squeeze into the passageway. Under the cover of the darkness, they crouched down and left the theater. In the private room on the 3rd floor, Lorraine watched the scene of the gunman's massacre. Her face was flushed with excitement as if she was drunk. She laughed out loud and immediately left the private room with Wen Shui. Surrounded by bodyguards, she returned to the parking lot. Therefore, none of them saw Hua Xiaoheng's godly marksmanship. He fired 3 shots cleanly. Not only did he kill the 3 gunmen, but he also destroyed the weapons in the hands of the 3 gunmen. Wen Shui recalled the scene of the gunman's massacre and smiled knowingly. This time she wanted to see how Gu Nianji would die. Gu Nianji wore a mask and escaped to the parking lot. She hid in a corner and didn't dare to move for the time being. She wanted to contact Hua Xiaoheng. At that moment she heard many people's footsteps approaching. She wondered if people had escaped from the theater's lobby and slowly craned her neck to look. Suddenly she felt a chill on top of her head. A cold gun barrel was pressed against her head. Gu Nianji's heart sank. Her eyes darted around and she saw a pair of shiny leather shoes and straight pants in front of her. She recognized the shoes and pants. They were Rhinitz's attire. Gunyanji still slowly raised her head even with the gun pointed at her head. She looked at the person half squatting in front of her. Sure enough, it was Rhinitz, whom she had just paralyzed with anesthetic gas. Gunyanji groaned inwardly and complained about how the gas didn't work on Rhinitz. Rhinitz's expression was cold. He sneered and whispered into her ear, "Strange, isn't it? Why didn't your anesthetic gas work?" Gunyanji didn't say anything. She pouted and rubbed her leg. "What do you want? Don't be impulsive. Let's talk this out. That kind of thing is good for those scumbags, but it's not enough to deal with me," Rhinitz said as he took out a handkerchief with his other hand and pressed it against his nose again. The medicine on the handkerchief could neutralize many types of anesthetic gas. As spies, they could paralyze people at any time, but they would also guard against being paralyzed by others. When Gunyanji paralyzed Rhinitz, she didn't dare to stay for long. She didn't have the strength or the tools to kill Rhinitz in one go. She was also worried that he had accomplices nearby, so her first reaction was to run. Sure enough, Rhinitz had accomplices nearby and had helped him neutralize the anesthetic. Rhinitz put the handkerchief back and picked her up with one hand. He walked over to Lorraine's group and said, "Looks like they were right. You really do know me." Gunyanji's heart skipped a beat. She finally understood where she had made a mistake. So Rhinitz had discovered that she had pretended not to know him. But how did Rhinitz know that she knew him? She and Hua Xiaoheng had recognized Rhinitz because they had met him in the other world. Gunyanji was very sure that the people here didn't know this secret. The other two people who knew were Lu Yuan and Lu Jin. She didn't believe that they would betray her even if they beat her to death. While she was wondering, Rhinitz had already brought her to Lorraine. Lorraine turned around and saw Rhinitz walking over with a girl in a pink dress. He was instantly overjoyed. "This is Gunyanji?" When Shuyi, who was standing next to him, was also ecstatic. She was treated like an honored guest by Lorraine's side, but Gunyanji was a stray dog who had been kidnapped. When Shuyi's eyes flashed with indescribable viciousness and hatred. Gunyanji was still puzzled when she looked up to see Shuyi's face, which had become thinner. Although it had become thinner, the outline of its bones was still there. At most, it had changed from a thick, silver plate to a thin, white porcelain plate. Rhinitz looked at Lorraine and said dryly, "Mr. Lorraine, your information was very accurate. She does know who I am." Lorraine laughed and patted Shuyi's shoulder. "This is all thanks to Miss Wen. If it weren't for her, how would we know that this little girl was putting on an act?" Gunyanji's thoughts instantly boiled like a vessel undergoing a chemical reaction. She instantly understood that Shuyi had betrayed her. But how did Shuyi know that she knew Rhinitz? In the other world, when she was being hunted down in the Alps and in danger, Shuyi had already been chased back to her hometown by Hijichu. In other words, Shuyi should have already returned to this world at that time. The person who was hunting her down in the other world was obviously Yamaguchi Aiko, who was working with Hua Jialan. Yamaguchi Aiko. The name was like a beam of light in the fog, illuminating Gunyanji's chaotic thoughts. She slowly raised her head and gave Shuyi a meaningful smile. They had previously only speculated that Yamaguchi Aiko and Yamaguchi Yuko were the same person. Now she understood that Yamaguchi Aiko, Yamaguchi Yuko, and Shuyi were the same person. From beginning to end, there was no Yamaguchi Yuko or Yamaguchi Aiko. There was only Shuyi. This is the second update of the day, Chapter 1825, Only Her. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. P.S. Thank you Heavenly Sugar for the 10,000 credits yesterday. Moi everyone little angels. Chapter 1837. When Shuyi's hair stood on end from Gunyanji's stare, and she couldn't help looking away with a frown. "Why are you staring at me? Don't you recognize me?" Gunyanji chuckled. "No wonder you're so thick-skinned. You have more than one face." Shuyi's heart skipped a beat and she pouted. "Keep resisting. Mr. Lorraine and Mr. Rhinitz aren't easy to deal with." They spoke in Mandarin so Lorraine couldn't understand them. However, from their expressions he could roughly guess that they were arguing. Lorraine coughed and interrupted them. "Miss Gu, you clearly know Rhinitz but you pretended not to know him to get close to him." "What?" Shuyi looked around anxiously and whispered, "Mr. Lorraine, let's take her back and interrogate her. This is someone else's place." "Ah, it's okay. Everyone here is our people." Lorraine looked around and said with relief. They had many people here both in the open and in the shadows. However, he also thought Shuyi was right. They should take her back and interrogate her. However, he was too curious. He had never seen prey actively approach the hunter. He had always been a sensitive person, but he couldn't help but overthink things at this time. Lorraine judged Gu Nianji by his own standards and felt that there was a deeper meaning behind Gu Nianji's abnormal behavior. Gu Nianji thought to herself, what deeper meaning could I have? Of course, she had to use this opportunity to get more information about the German Federal Intelligence Service's secret key. However, even when Shuyi didn't know about this, Gu Nianji smiled faintly and didn't panic at all after being captured. Her relaxed demeanor made Lorraine even more suspicious. What if she was a bait set out by someone else? If he took her back, wouldn't he be falling into someone else's trap? With that thought, he didn't want to take Gu Nianji away immediately. Lorraine's expression darkened as he raised his chin at Reinitz. Let her speak. Why would she take the opportunity to get close to you? Reinitz first blew up all the lights in the parking lot and destroyed all the surveillance cameras. He then walked up to Gu Nianji and grabbed her by the throat. He pointed the gun at her forehead again and said coldly, "Speak. Otherwise I'll blow your head off." In the darkened parking lot, there was only the vague outline of a tall figure standing next to Lorraine's bulletproof car. Lor's bodyguards surrounded him and Wen Shuyi in the middle. Even a sniper would not be able to hurt them through the layers of human shields. Behind Lorraine and Wen Shuyi was a bulletproof car with bodyguards next to them. Opposite them were Gu Nianji and Reinitz. Reinitz was tall and strong, so Gu Nianji was almost lifted by the neck by him. Her feet were off the ground and she flopped in the air. It was extremely uncomfortable. She coughed violently and struggled in Reinitz's hands. She pretended to be unyielding and refused to tell the truth, as if she really had an ulterior motive. Lu Jin saw this scene on the monitor and almost went crazy. He shouted at Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Yuan, "Hurry up and do it. Otherwise I'll rush out and shoot." He had a gun, but his aim was not accurate. If he rushed out, he would die together with them. Gu Nianji had a miniature Bluetooth headset in her ear. She heard Lu Jin's frantic cries and was very anxious. She quickly said, "Don't worry. Don't worry. I'll talk. I'll talk." She, Lu Yuan, Lu Jin, and Hua Xiaoheng had a special communication system. Everyone could hear what any one of them said. Therefore, Hua Xiaoheng heard Gu Nianji and immediately understood what she meant. Hua Xiaoheng also felt bad, but he tried his best to restrain himself and said in a low voice, "Uncle Lu, don't worry. Nianji has her plan." Reinitz only let go when he saw that Gu Nianji was willing to talk. Gu Nianji's feet returned to the ground. Her legs went limp and she collapsed to the ground. She clutched her throat and coughed violently. Lorraine was impatient. He walked up and kicked Gu Nianji in the back. "Hurry up and tell me. Don't dawdle." Gu Nianji bit the corner of her mouth and almost fell to the ground. She endured the pain and looked back at Lorraine. She said fiercely, "Don't you dare touch me again. The KGB is not to be trifled with. They'll break every bone in your body. Then they'll grind your bones and feed them to the dogs." "The KGB?" Lorraine was shocked again and retracted her foot. "What do you have to do with the KGB?" When Gu Nianji said KGB, Hua Xiaoheng roughly guessed what she was going to do. He immediately discussed a new plan of action with Lu Jin and Lu Yuan and quickly made his way into the dark parking lot. Compared to the noisy theater lobby waiting for the police, the parking lot, which was still some distance away from the theater, was extremely quiet. Reinitz was also shocked when he heard Gu Nianji say KGB. He took a step forward and grabbed Gu Nianji's neck again to pull her up from the ground. This time he put the gun against her right cheek and said coldly, "Tell me everything. Otherwise if I shoot you, your face will be disfigured." He knew that for a beautiful girl, her appearance was more important than her life. As expected, Gu Nianji's line of defense collapsed as soon as he threatened her. She burst into tears and pointed at Wen Shuyi. "It's her. It's her. It's her. The KGB wants her. I'm just a scout. Don't ruin my face. No." Sob, sob, sob. She cried so hard that her entire body trembled and her heart was broken. She played the image of a girl who had broken down because of fear perfectly. Wen Shuyi was surprised and nervous when she heard this, but deep in her heart, there was also an indescribable joy. This was a dream that she had liked to have since her childhood. She dreamed that she was no longer the gardener's daughter, but a very important person. She didn't have to work hard to be recognized and praised by others just like Gu Nianji. Was her dream really coming true now? Wen Shuyi quietly pinched the side of her thigh. It hurt. It really hurt. It wasn't a dream. Reinitz and Lorraine looked at each other and felt that it was a bit tricky. From the moment they found out that Gu Nianji had deliberately approached Reinitz, they had felt that there must be someone behind Gu Nianji. But they had never expected that the KGB would be behind Gu Nianji. And the KGB was also here for Wen Shui, who was the closest to perfect genes. This reason was too damn good. Lorraine thought about how hard he had worked to get the perfect genes. He had even hired the most elite agents from the United States and Germany. What was so strange about the KGB interfering? The more he thought about it, the more he felt like he knew the truth. He immediately grabbed Wen Shui's arm and protected her like she was his treasure. He said sternly, "Get in the car." Even the KGB was here for her, and they had used Gun Yanji, one of the perfect genes candidates, as bait. It was clear how determined the KGB was to get Wen Shui. Lorraine completely believed that Wen Shui was the person closest to perfect genes, and Gun Yanji was just trash. He regretted making such a stupid plan. Luckily he still had time. Lorraine thought about it with lingering fear. Just as he opened the car door, the entire parking lot suddenly changed. Boom, boom, boom. Earth-shattering explosions suddenly rang out from all four corners of the parking lot. The blazing flames lit up the dark parking lot. A man in black sprinted over the top of a car in the distance like a hawk. Every time he stepped on a car, the car behind him would explode into flames. The series of flames became his backdrop. With a wave of his hand, a shiny stainless steel cable latched onto the steel beams of the parking lot. Using the strength of the cable, he quickly pounced. When he was close to where Lorraine and the others were standing, the man raised his other hand, and a strange-looking assault rifle appeared in his hand. It was 2/3 shorter than a normal assault rifle and only slightly longer than a handgun, but its power was no less than a normal assault rifle. His body followed the arc of the steel cable as he flew through the air. His other hand that was holding the gun was raised. When he reached the highest point, he pulled the trigger. Tat-a-tat-tat. Tat-a-tat-tat. Tongues of fire spewed from the ultra-short assault rifle's barrel, and bullets rained down on Lorraine's group of bodyguards. These people had just been fighting back, trying to shoot the man in black who had leaped over with the steel cable. But the man was too fast and they couldn't aim at him at all. Instead, they were shot and fell to the ground one by one, screaming in pain. Amidst the blazing flames, the man descended from the sky. His breathtakingly handsome face was covered in a layer of frost, as if the fiery explosions couldn't shake him in the slightest. When Shui saw the man's face and screamed, "Peter! He's the Soviet diplomat in the Wuxia Empire. He's the KGB of the Soviet Union." As soon as she finished speaking, Hua Xiaoheng was already on the roof of the bulletproof car behind her. He landed lightly, then quickly swept his leg out, causing Lorraine's body to spin like a spinning top. She spun about 10 times before slamming into the wall next to the garage with a loud bang. Reinitz raised his hand and fired, but he didn't hit Hua Xiaoheng. Instead, he hit Wen Shui's arm. Hua Xiaoheng had already scooped up Wen Shui and used her as a meat shield in front of him. Reinitz's pupils contracted, but he didn't dare shoot again. He was about to grab Gun Yanji, who was on the ground, and use her as a meat shield when Gun Yanji kicked him in the lower half of his body. Reinitz abruptly retreated and dodged Gun Yanji's end of descendants kick. Gun Yanji took the opportunity to roll backward and arrive at the location Lu Yuan had told her in the Bluetooth headset. Lu Yuan dashed out from behind, raised his hand and fired several shots. He then threw down a tear gas grenade, picked up Gun Yanji and turned to run. He quickly disappeared into the corner door on the other side of the parking lot. He and Hua Xiaoheng happened to be going in 2 different directions. Reinitz quickly contacted his own people to get them to chase after him, but his phone couldn't get through at all. He could only hear the sound of static electricity. Electromagnetic shielding. Reinitz slammed his phone on the ground. It really is the KGB of the Soviet Union. In his opinion, only the KGB of the Soviet Union had the ability to carry out such a small-scale fixed-point electromagnetic shielding. Lorraine's face was bruised and swollen from the kick, but he still staggered over and said in a hoarse voice, "Go save Wen Shui. We can't let her fall into the hands of the KGB of the Soviet Union." He wanted to die when he thought about the research results that his family had spent hundreds of years and billions of dollars to obtain being intercepted by the KGB of the Soviet Union. "Hurry up and go," he roared at Reinitz. Reinitz instinctively wanted to chase after Gun Yanji, but Lorraine was the boss and the person who paid for it was the boss. He had to help Lorraine save Wen Shui. This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1826, Perfect Bait. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. At 8:00 p.m. the second update. Moi everyone little angels. Chapter 1838. At the other exit of the parking lot, Hua Xiaoheng had already run far away with the injured Wen Shui. Reinitz had no choice but to chase in that direction and give up on the other direction where the second man in black had taken Gunyenji. The loud explosion in the parking lot drowned out the commotion in the theater hall. The New York police, who were always late, finally arrived. Thankfully, although the police were sometimes late, they were never absent. Lorraine looked at his men lying on the ground and the large dent on the roof of the luxury bulletproof car behind him. He couldn't help but kick the car hard. Beep. The automatic alarm that hadn't been blasted when no one fell from the sky didn't sound, but now that he kicked the car, the alarm started beeping wildly. The New York police surrounded the parking lot and only saw Lorraine hiding under a luxury car door with his hands over his head. Corpses were strewn all around him. The surroundings were filled with raging flames. Many cars were on fire and there were signs of explosions everywhere. The roof of the parking lot's steel beams was about to collapse. Bring him back to the station for interrogation. Leave this place for the fire trucks. The New York police never stood under a collapsing wall. Seeing the situation, they immediately took the only person alive, Lorraine, away and left the still burning parking lot for the fire department to extinguish. Lorraine only gave his name, then said he was attacked and asked for a lawyer. The New York police were no strangers to Lorraine. He was the stock god Lorraine who gave the perfect jeans speech at the New York Stock Exchange that day and caused the Lorraine Corporation stock price to soar from less than 100 to 2,000. Because of that, they were very polite to him and didn't think Lorraine was responsible. They all believed someone wanted to assassinate Mr. Lorraine. Lorraine didn't dare say it was the KGB for now. First of all, he didn't want to cause a diplomatic dispute. If he really angered the KGB, even a world-class plutocrat like him wouldn't be able to handle it. The all-pervasive KGB would never let him live to see tomorrow's sun. Second of all, he had his own dirty tricks and didn't want the police to realize there was something wrong and get himself into trouble. Therefore he was only a poor victim, who didn't know who did this to him. By the time his lawyer arrived, a carefully crafted story had already been written. In this story there was no Reinitz, no Gunyenji, nor the two KGB, and Wen Shui who had been kidnapped by them. Only two crazed men in black had not only blown up the parking lot, but they had also killed all of Lore's bodyguards. They had wanted to kidnap Lore and extort a huge sum of money from him, but the wise police quickly arrived at the scene and rescued Lore from the abyss of suffering. Gunyenji sat cross-legged on the sofa in the living room of a mansion in the suburbs of New York. As she ate the mango sago that Lu Yuan had made for her, she watched Lore's lawyer interview on TV. Listening to the lawyer's carefully crafted story, the corners of his mouth twitched and he said disdainfully, "Keep making it up. Why don't you say that there are aliens who want to capture you for research? TSK, in the end you still feel guilty." Lu Jin sat next to her and examined her body. All the instruments around him showed that her body was normal. It had been 12 hours since last night, and the ghastly abrasions on Gunyenji's body had disappeared without a trace. It was as if they had never happened. Lu Jin breathed a sigh of relief and carefully touched Gunyenji's head, as if she was delicate porcelain that was fragile and thin. Gunyenji turned to look at him with a smile and handed him her mango sago. "Dad, do you want to eat it? It's delicious. Do you like it? I'll ask Boss Lu to make you another bowl?" Lu Jin said with a smile and pushed the mango sago back. "Eat more if you like it." Gunyenji nodded and scooped herself a big mouthful of mango. She stuffed her mouth full and her big eyes curved into two bright crescent moons. Lu Yuan and Hua Xiaoheng walked into the living room. Hua Xiaoheng was sweating profusely. He was wearing a light gray t-shirt and camouflage sweatpants. He had just come out of the gym. Lu Yuan was dressed in white home clothes, and he looked so gentle and elegant that he looked like he had just come back from a walk in the woods. The two of them sat down on the sofa next to Gunyenji and Lu Jin and watched TV for a while. Gunyenji smiled and said, "It's over. You guys are too good at hiding. What if they can't find us now? Then wouldn't this show have been for nothing?" Hua Xiaoheng glanced at Lu Jin and smiled faintly. "Where's Wen Shui? How's she doing?" Lu Jin's face darkened and he said stiffly, "She's not dead. She was just not dead, but she couldn't escape punishment. If it weren't for the fact that he had to keep Wen Shui as a shield for Gunyenji, Lu Jin would have cut her into pieces for experiments." Gunyenji put down the small white porcelain bowl of mango sago in her hand and said angrily, "We can't let her off so easily. Do you know that Aiko Yamaguchi was the one who chased me to death in the Alps over there? She was the one. She was also the one who used the Feng family to drug me." Hua Xiaoheng, Lu Yuan, and Lu Jin had all heard what Lorraine had said at the time. They knew that Gunyenji's identity had been exposed because Wen Shui had snitched on her. But only now did they understand how she had been exposed. Even someone as calm as Hua Xiaoheng couldn't help but change his expression. The Yamaguchi sisters were all impersonated by Wen Shui? How can that be fake? Gu Nianji analyzed the situation for him. Back then the matter of drugging me was only our speculation. But later, when I was being hunted down in the Alps, only Yamaguchi Aiko knew about it. At that time, when Shui was clearly chased back to her hometown by young Master He, Gu Nianji spread her hands. At that time young Master He really couldn't tell the truth. Even if he did, I probably wouldn't believe him. Who would have known that parallel spaces really existed? Not only did they exist, but she had also come from the other side. Gu Nianji rubbed her head. Amnesia was really a double-edged sword. There are good and bad sides to it. Hua Xiaoheng frowned thoughtfully. You mean, when Shui had actually sneaked over from her hometown at that time? Gu Nianji nodded heavily. That's for sure. And that was her most important alibi. That's the only way she could carry out her plan without any scruples. At that time, someone had taken advantage of Hua Xiaoheng's gift to Gu Nianji to tamper with the delivery location. Then they had used Hua Xiaoheng's identity to text Gu Nianji to meet at the Königssee near Munich, Germany. At the time, I believed it without a doubt because their technology was too advanced. And the invalid IPs we found later showed that the instructions were sent from this world. As Gu Nianji spoke, she connected all the clues in her heart. After the plan was completed, she went from this world to the other world and personally dealt with me. In the end, she didn't expect Reinitz to intercept her. Of course she was impressed. Lu Jin nodded. Calling from this world to the other world or logging into the website there, will display invalid IPs and invalid phone numbers for the other world. This is determined by the laws of physics, not by any high technology. Lu Yuan listened for a while and asked tentatively, then is it possible that Aiko Yamaguchi sent a message to Wen Shui? Told her the whole story? If they weren't the same person and Wen Shui wasn't in our world at the time, how could Aiko Yamaguchi contact her? I don't think Wen Shui would reveal such confidential information to her. Gu Nianji shook her head to deny this possibility. Since Wen Shui had gone back, at the time, this kind of contact was impossible. Hua Xiaoheng also said, you guys said that it takes a lot of energy to contact the other world from this world. Where did Wen Shui get so much energy to support her contact the other world? And she could come and go freely without being discovered by He Qingjian? This was a suspicious point. But Gu Nianji quickly figured it out. She said, of course Wen Shui can't do these things alone. Don't forget, she has Qin Yaoguang's full support behind her, and Qin Yaoguang presided over the memory-stripping surgery. Who knows if she did anything to it? So Qin Yaoguang must have been involved among the people who were hunting me down. This was the second watch of the day, chapter 1827, she has a share. Remind everyone of your monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1839. Why did Qin Yaoguang want to kill you? Lu Yuan asked in confusion. Didn't she always want to get you back for research? Lu Jin said disapprovingly, Qin Yaoguang didn't know that Nianji's genetic enhancement had been successful. She had done so many experiments when Nianji was 2 to 6 years old, but none of them yielded any results. She had wanted to give up a long time ago. Lu Yuan raised an eyebrow. So that means it was because Nianji was kidnapped that she became interested in Nianji again? Lu Jin sighed and stared at Hua Xiaoheng with an unfriendly gaze. He snorted. It was all because Nianji took the bullet for someone, and then she quickly recovered. She was alive and kicking as if nothing had happened. Do you think Qin Yaoguang didn't suspect anything at all? With such a serious gunshot wound, Gu Nianji only needed less than a month to recuperate like a normal person. Others didn't know the crux of the matter, but Qin Yaoguang definitely suspected it. Hua Xiaoheng pursed his lips, his expression slightly cold. Gu Nianji said faintly. Xiao Lu, when I was being hunted down there, she should have been pregnant with General He's child. Hua Xiaoheng sat next to her and placed his arm on the back of the sofa behind her. He crossed one leg and said calmly, it's also because Nianji isn't her biological daughter. Although no one knows about this, it's a ticking time bomb. If someone reveals it one day, how will she face the He family? Gu Nianji hadn't thought of this. After being reminded by Hua Xiaoheng, she immediately thought of another reason. That's right. Wen Shui, the treasure girl, is her biological daughter. In order for Wen Shui to be with young Master He, I have to die. Lu Jin was so angry that he slammed the coffee table in front of him. How preposterous. I thought that if I sent Nianji over, I would be able to escape her clutches. It would have been possible, but He Jichu actually chased after her. Not only did he chase after her, but he also brought Wen Shuyi with him, Huo Xiaoheng said sullenly. He caught a mouse and threw it into the rice jar. Shouldn't young master he take responsibility for it? Gu Nianji had no intention of blaming He Jichu. She shook her head and said, actually, young master he had good intentions, and Wen Shuyi would definitely behave differently in front of him. He only brought her here so he must have trusted her a lot. But later, he also noticed that Wen Shuyi's attitude towards me wasn't right, so he drove her away. But who would have known that Wen Shuyi would sneak over again? You can't possibly blame all the mistakes of the people around you, right? If that's the case, then wouldn't Huo Xiao have to take full responsibility for his subordinate's betrayal? Is Chen Lai going to be imprisoned because Yi Zitan sold me out? Lu Jin didn't feel good when he heard this. He scoffed and said, "You're quite open-minded. So that kid He Jichu can get away with it. I'm not exonerating him." Gu Nianji helplessly held Lu Jin's arm. "Dad, I'm just being objective. It could only be said that Wen Shuyi and the Qin family had hidden themselves too deeply. Or maybe they're not on the same level as me. Before I appeared, they were still fine and didn't cause any trouble. Now that I've appeared, they won't be able to enjoy the peace and quiet anymore." Gu Nianji shrugged. "But this isn't a reason for them to kill me, and I won't forgive them." Lu Jin nodded heavily and said coldly, "That's for sure. But that kid He Jichu didn't run away either. I won't let him off easy." As Lu Jin spoke, he stood up and walked towards the basement. Gu Nianji quickly followed. "Dad, what are you doing? Don't do anything rash. Young master he won't believe a one-sided story." Lu Jin stopped in his tracks and said angrily, "What one-sided story? My daughter is telling the truth." Gu Nianji was amused and touched. She pulled Lu Jin's arm and deliberately changed the topic. "How's Wen Shuyi's condition? She was shot and you haven't treated her yet." "What's the hurry? She won't die anyway." Lu Jin grunted and pushed Gu Nianji's hand away. "Don't worry, I'll go get the bullet for her later." Lu Jin laughed sinisterly. "Doesn't she enjoy being the person closest to perfect genes in the limelight? I'll satisfy her." "What are you doing?" Gu Nianji was shocked. "Don't do anything rash." "Why would I?" Lu Jin laughed strangely. "Just you wait, I'll go and operate on her now." As he spoke, Lu Jin called out in the direction of the living room, "Boss Lu, come here and help me." Lu Yuan stood up with a smile and walked slowly towards them. Standing beside them, Lu Yuan said kindly to Gu Nianji, "Nianji, don't worry. Your father has a way." Gu Nianji had no choice but to get out of the way to the basement. She waited anxiously in the living room for nearly 5 hours before Lu Jin and Lu Yuan came up from the basement. Both of them were wearing green surgical gowns and had not taken off their surgical caps. "How's Wen Shuyi?" Gu Nianji asked quickly. Lu Jin took off his mask and winked at her. "Very good, she'll be cured tomorrow." Gu Nianji's eyes widened. "So fast? She suffered a gunshot wound." "Yes." Lu Jin smiled mischievously. "She's the closest human to perfect genes. Of course she has to heal quickly." Huo Xiaoheng walked over and stood behind Gu Nianji with his arms crossed. "Did you also improve Wen Shuyi's genes?" "Of course not." Lu Jin pursed his lips disdainfully. Wen Shuyi's genetic defect is a human error. It can't be repaired or treated at all. I only used some biological therapy that promotes muscle growth to quickly heal her gunshot wound at the muscle level. Just like growing human ears from mice, Lu Jin would also use stem cells to grow parts of the human body. Gu Nianji's eyes lit up. "But the effect seems to be that she recovered on her own, isn't it?" Lu Jin smiled and pointed a finger at her. Suddenly he became Buddhist. The Buddha said, "Can't say, can't say." "Then when will she wake up?" Gu Nianji looked at her watch. "I want to ask her a few questions." "Tomorrow morning." Lu Jin also looked at his watch. "We still have 20 hours. Then we'll be leaving from here." "Huh?" Gu Nianji was very surprised. "Why are we leaving? Have they found her yet?" 20 hours is enough for them to find her," Lu Jin said with a smile. "The owner of the house here is a Soviet, so..." Gu Nianji understood and laughed. "Are we really going to let the KGB take the blame for this?" "It's not exactly taking the blame." Huo Xiaoheng's eyes flashed and he said with a smile, "I've already reported Wen Shuyi's situation to the higher-ups. The KGB's higher-ups are very interested in her." Gu Nianji, was this going to be real? TSK, what was the scariest? People who were serious about faking were the scariest. Early the next morning, Gunyanji put on light makeup for her face and went to the room where Wen Shuyi was in the basement. As soon as she pushed open the door, she was almost blinded by the shiny silver-gray stainless steel equipment inside. Anyone with eyes could tell at a glance that this was a laboratory, and a very advanced one at that. The laboratory equipment here was all marked in Russian, and the computer was also operating in Russian. Even the experimental records were made in Russian. Gunyanji didn't know what to say. She carried the shelf and walked into Wen Shuyi's bed. Wen Shuyi was already awake and sitting on the bed. She raised her hand and touched her shoulder in a daze. She clearly remembered that she had been shot here yesterday, but when she woke up this morning, there was nothing wrong with it at all. There were no bandages, no wounds, and no pain. What was going on? She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice someone walking in. It wasn't until Gunyanji walked in front of her that she suddenly looked up. Seeing that it was Gunyanji, she breathed a sigh of relief, but quickly revealed a disgusted expression and said coldly, "What are you doing here? Are you here to laugh at me?" Gunyanji tilted her head and deliberately said with a wronged expression, "What's the use of me laughing at you? I just want to know why you hate me so much. First it was Yamaguchi Yuko, then it was Yamaguchi Aiko. You were both pretending to be them, weren't you?" Wen Shuyi smiled and looked at Gunyanji lazily. "You need evidence to speak. What evidence do you have to prove that I'm them?" She rubbed her shoulder where she had been shot with her hand. Felt magical. She remembered that she had been injured when she was in the other world, but it hadn't healed so quickly. Gunyanji pulled over a chair and sat down in front of her. She clenched her fists and said indignantly, "You still deny it? Yamaguchi Aiko is Yamaguchi Yuko. These two people are the same person. The person who chased me in the Alps in the other world called herself Yamaguchi Aiko, and had contact with Hujialan. At that time, Miss Wen, you should have returned to this world. You shouldn't have known that I knew Reinitz. But you knew it clearly. This means that you are Yamaguchi Aiko." Wen Shuyi's eyes flashed. Sure enough, it was because she had revealed Gunyanji's intentions to Lorraine that she had been exposed. It was also Lorraine's fault for betraying her immediately. Wen Shuyi lowered her eyes and said lightly, "Miss Gu is a famous lawyer. Isn't this logical inference a little too loose?" "How is it loose?" Gunyanji deliberately looked indignant. "If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals B equals C. Isn't this logical chain very clear?" Wen Shuyi sneered and leaned forward. She asked directly in Gunyanji's face, "What do you mean A equals B equals C? Are you out of your mind? I know about you and Reinitz. Couldn't Yamaguchi Aiko have called me and told me about the situation over there?" Gunyanji raised an eyebrow, and her voice became erratic. Really? She called you? But you're here and she's over there. How do you make this call? I heard that it takes a lot of energy." "Haha, you don't have to worry about that. I have the authority to make as many calls as I want." "Really?" Gunyanji stood up at this moment. Her tone suddenly became calm and composed, and the anger from before instantly disappeared. "You don't admit that you are Yamaguchi Aiko Yamaguchi Yuko, but you admit that you colluded with Yamaguchi Aiko. So you were the mastermind behind me being hunted in the other world. Otherwise, why would someone who was personally hunting me down call you to report the situation?" Wen Shuyi's expression stiffened, and she gripped the white sheets tightly with both hands. "Also, I have to ask young Master He how you should be punished for using the magnetic field communicator to contact the other world without authorization." Wen Shuyi panicked. "What nonsense are you talking about? I didn't." "You didn't?" Gunyanji took out her phone. "The video has been recorded. It's useless for you to deny it. As for whether you are Yamaguchi Aiko and Yamaguchi Yuko's sisters or not, it doesn't matter to me at all. What's important is that I prove that regardless of whether you are them or not, you are the mastermind behind the two incidents that harmed me." This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1828, Serious People Are the Scariest. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. 8 p.m. the second update. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1840. The corners of Wen Shuyi's eyes twitched uncontrollably, and her delicate face looked a little distorted. "You actually took a video without me knowing?" Wen Shuyi looked at Gunyanji angrily. "Do you know that this is illegal evidence? The court won't accept it." Gunyanji looked at her in amusement and waved her phone. "Who said I was going to take it to the court? I said it was for young Master He to see. It's none of my business what young Master He wants to do with you." Wen Shuyi gasped, and her slender eyes widened into obtuse triangles. Her hands were trembling violently, and her entire body was trembling. The thought of Hijichu finding out everything, when Shui covered her face with her hands uncontrollably and let out a sob. How could you do this? You're too vicious. Killing people is just a matter of nodding your head. Aren't you afraid of retribution for being so vicious? I'm vicious and vicious. The corners of Gunyenji's mouth twitched. When Shui, is there something wrong with your understanding of vicious and vicious? No matter how vicious I am I as powerful as you? You really want to ruin my reputation and take my life. Gunyenji thought about what Yamaguchi Yuko had done to her with the help of the Feng family and was furious. Have you forgotten about H3AB7? Have you forgotten what kind of genetic drug this is? How much do you hate me? Do you hate me so much that you want my children and grandchildren to degenerate into brainless idiots? Qinlai had told her about the effects of H3AB7 later, and Gunyenji's hair stood on end when she heard it. It turned out that the aphrodisiac effect of this drug was only a side effect of the drug's development. Its true effect was to destroy the immune system and genetic system at the genetic level. It would make the children born to the mother weaker and weaker generation after generation. Their intelligence would become lower and lower, but their physical strength would become stronger and stronger. In the end, they would become like those brainless troll in Western legends. They would become other people's livestock like pigs, dogs, cows, and sheep. They would be worse than slaves. You're saying I'm vicious? How can someone like you have the cheek to say that? Gunyenji was furious. She stepped forward and pulled Wen Shuyi's hand away. She slapped Wen Shuyi hard with her other hand. Slap. Wen Shuyi's face was slapped to the other side. Her face was burning and the pain made her nose sour. Tears were about to come out. Wen Shuyi turned to glare at Gunyenji and sneered, "But you're fine. How can you blame this on me? You accused me of something that didn't happen and told young Master He about it. What would young Master He think of me? You just can't bear to see me do well. You can't bear to see me replace your position in young Master He's heart. To put it bluntly, you're just a green tea bitch. Hee right? Are you a pure and innocent white lotus flower?" Gunyenji retorted, "That's right, I only lost my life, but you lost your idol's heart. Don't you feel terrible? Had the whole world collapsed? Are you going to have a mental breakdown soon? When Shui, I'll let you see which is more unbearable, physical pain or mental breakdown." Gunyenji grabbed the hair on the back of Wen Shuyi's head and forced her to look at her. "And look at your face. Don't think I can't tell that you've had plastic surgery just like your cheap mother. You want to look like Xie Qingying? Unfortunately, no matter how much you do, young Master He won't even look at you." At this point, Wen Shuyi knew that she couldn't talk to Gunyenji anymore. However, she had been captured by the KGB of the Soviet Union. She firmly believed that they hadn't put in so much effort just to let Gunyenji vent her anger. She had a greater use for them, so she could use this as a condition to negotiate with the KGB of the Soviet Union. As for Gunyenji, how important did she think she was? When Shui angrily spat at Gunyenji's face, Gunyenji's eyes and hands were quick. She grabbed her hair and quickly pulled it down. When Shui was forced to raise her head at a 90-degree angle and spit up. When it fell, it landed right on her face. She almost vomited when she smelled an unpleasant odor. Gunyenji let go of her hand and took a step back. She said aloofly, "You think your saliva is dirty and smells bad? That's right. Seeing yourself clearly will help you develop the right outlook on life, the world, and values. This lesson is free for you. I won't charge you for it." When Shui wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at Gunyenji with a sneer. "Don't be so smug. Do you think I don't know? You're just a pawn. Where are the people behind you? Let them come out. If they want something from me, they naturally have to cooperate with me." "Cooperate?" Gunyenji raised her eyebrows. "When Shui, what misunderstanding do you have about your situation? You're a prisoner now. What right do you have to negotiate with them?" "I'm a prisoner?" When Shui rolled her eyes. "I'm a prisoner, yet they're still letting me stay in such a good hospital? And they're even giving me such a high-quality surgery?" She caressed her shoulder where she had been shot yesterday and asked tentatively. Gunyenji was amused, but on the surface she said without thinking, "Stop dreaming. What good hospital? What high-quality surgery? They just took out the bullet. How sophisticated do you think it is?" When Shui was so excited that her face turned red, and her voice trembled slightly. "You're saying that they only took out the bullet for me yesterday? They didn't use any other medicine?" Gunyenji chuckled and pulled open Wen Shui's collar with one hand, revealing her shoulder. Suddenly, her eyes widened as if she had seen a ghost. "What happened?" Where's your gunshot wound? The shoulder there was as white as before, and there was no sign of injury at all. When Shui laughed out loud and pushed Gunyanji away. She said arrogantly, "Stop talking. You don't know anything. Go and find the person in charge of the KGB. I have something to say to them." She gracefully adjusted her collar that had been pulled open and leaned against the bed, acting like a bossy queen. Looking at Gunyanji's pale face as if she had lost her parents, and her back view as she staggered out, when Shui felt that she had vented her anger. After living in Gunyanji's shadow for so many years, she had long been in a situation where she would not rest until one of them was dead. Now that the tables had turned, it was time for her to shake. At that moment, when Shui even suspected that the genes that had cured Hijichu's illness had actually belonged to her, not Gunyanji. She didn't know what her mother, Qin Yaoguang, was thinking. She had actually tried her best to get Gunyanji engaged to Hijichu and ignored her biological daughter. Just as when Shui was feeling sorry for herself, shy and sweet and terrified, Gunyanji had already arrived at the next room and was observing Wen Shui's situation through the one-way transparent glass wall. She looks like she's already schizophrenic. Gunyanji became worried. The law is lenient towards mental patients. She had originally wanted to send Wen Shui to court and let her receive the punishment she deserved. But what if she couldn't stand so much stimulation and really became mentally ill? If that was the case, Gunyanji felt that she was going to vomit blood. Hua Xiaoheng crossed his arms and stood beside her. He said thoughtfully, "With her situation, regardless of whether she's schizophrenic or not, she can't go to court." Lu Jin also sneered with his hands behind his back. "Her genes are so perfect, so of course they have to be used to their fullest potential. You guys wait, I'll go hypnotize her and see how much more I can get out of her." "Let's go over together," Gunyanji suggested. "We'll go over after she's completely hypnotized and doesn't recognize anyone." This was today's second update, Chapter 1829, You Only Lost Your Life But I Lost His Heart. A reminder to everyone for their monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1841. When Shui sat alone in the ward and looked around. She didn't get out of bed because her legs were bound by thin chains and she couldn't run at all. And she didn't want to run. How could she escape if she fell into the hands of the KGB? She might as well negotiate with them and fight for greater benefits. When Shui felt that she was someone who wouldn't give up easily, so she waited patiently in the ward. She couldn't understand a single word of the Russian signs in the room, so she didn't bother to study them carefully. After waiting quietly for a while, the door of the ward was pushed open again. When Shui looked up and saw a man in a white coat and a white doctor's hat walking in. He was tall and thin with a typical Slavic appearance. He had deep-set eyes, curly brown hair and gray eyes, but his pupils were a very light moss green. When Shui only needed one look to confirm that this was a Soviet. She smiled at him and said in English, "Hi, would you? You have several minutes?" The man expressionlessly said a string of Russian. The man spoke a string of Russian with an expressionless face. The man then took out an old pocket watch and waved it at Wen Shui. Wen Shui was baffled and couldn't help but take a look. Then there was nothing. The man then took out an old pocket watch and waved it at Wen Shui. This typical Slavic Caucasian was Lu Jin in disguise. He took out the pocket watch and quickly hypnotized Wen Shui. Then he sat down in front of her bed and began to ask, "What's your name?" The expression on Wen Shui's face was very normal. She didn't have the sluggish look that most people would have when they were hypnotized. She said slowly, "Wen Shui. Have you ever used the names Yamaguchi Yuko and Yamaguchi Aiko?" This was Lu Jin's biggest concern. Wen Shui nodded normally. "Yes." Lu Jin's anger reached its peak. Without hesitation, he picked up the electrode sensor beside the bed and pressed it on Wen Shui's 10 fingers. Then he turned on the power switch and gradually increased the voltage. Wen Shui was expressionless at first, but slowly, it was as if a knife was swimming through her nervous system, almost scraping off a layer of the neurons in her body. This kind of pain acted directly on the nervous system, and it was more violent and intense than any other kind of pain. Wen Shui suddenly let out a heart-wrenching scream. Her entire face turned red, as if she had been exposed to the sun for a whole day on a tropical beach. Her facial features were extremely distorted. Her mouth was open and one could see her tongue moving rapidly in her mouth. The air vibrated through her vocal cords, and the pitch was so high that it almost broke through the roof. Gunyanji had just pushed the door open when she was frightened by the ear-piercing scream. She quickly retreated. He shut the door tightly, and only then did the ear-piercing sound disappear. Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Yuan walked over and also heard Wen Shuyi scream. Hua Xiaoheng asked worriedly, "Will such intense pain wake her up? Make the hypnosis fail?" Lu Yuan shrugged and pushed open the door as if nothing had happened. He walked in first and said, "I want her to be awake from time to time and forget from time to time. Only then can I better reshape her memory." Lu Yuan was also wearing a white doctor's robe and a white doctor's hat. His face was also disguised as a Slavic. He came to Lu Jin's side and asked him in Russian, "Is that enough? Is she awake now?" Lu Jin nodded and looked at the deep fear in Wen Shuyi's eyes. He nodded in satisfaction and said, "This is an anti-electric shock experiment. The situation is good. As expected of the person closest to the perfect gene." When he said perfect gene, he was using English. Wen Shuyi understood. She was in so much pain that her forehead was covered in sweat, but she couldn't faint. She was so dispirited that she didn't even have the strength to raise her head. She asked weakly, "What are you doing? I want to see your boss. You can't do this to me." Lu Jin was expressionless as he took out the pocket watch again. Wen Shuyi tried her best to control herself from looking at the pocket watch, but the corner of her eye was still attracted by the rhythmic shaking of the pocket watch. There seemed to be a question in her ear. She tried her best to hear what the person was saying, but the person's voice seemed to be far and near. Every time she was about to hear it clearly, the voice would move away again. Her thoughts were like a child chasing after a butterfly in the wilderness, drifting away along with the beautiful butterfly. Lu Jin ended the low-frequency chanting and said into the Bluetooth headset, "All right, she's entered a deep hypnosis. You can come in now." Lu Yuan then took out his earplugs. Otherwise he would have been hypnotized as well. Hua Xiaoheng pushed the door open and entered first. Gu Nianji saw that both of them had entered, so she mustered up her courage and followed them in. In the ward, Wen Shuyi sat on the hospital bed. She seemed to be deep in thought and her eyes were unfocused. Gu Nianji stood beside Hua Xiaoheng and said emotionally, "Yamaguchi Yuko, Yamaguchi Aiko, it really is her." Although they didn't have any concrete evidence, the logical chain pointed to Wen Shuyi, and she had just admitted it herself. Unfortunately, such content could not be used as evidence in court. Lu Jin's expression was very ugly. He took a step to the side and said, "Which one of you is going to ask? I'll observe her condition from the side." Lu Yuan looked at Hua Xiaoheng and Gu Nianji and said, "You can ask. We don't know her very well." Their understanding of Wen Shuyi had indeed only begun after Gu Nianji had been kidnapped. They hadn't paid any attention to her before. In Lu Yuan and Lu Jin's knowledge, she had always been a maidservant who followed He Jichu around and took care of him. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at Gu Nianji and raised his hand. "You ask first." Gu Nianji nodded and stood in the middle. She looked at Wen Shuyi's face, which was flushed from the electric shock, and clenched her fists. "Why did you pretend to be Yamaguchi Yuko and use the Feng family to harm Gu Nianji? How did she offend you?" At that time, Wen Shuyi had just come to this world with He Jichu and had no interaction with Gu Nianji at all. Although Gu Nianji had her suspicions, she had yet to confirm them. She wanted to know why Wen Shuyi's hatred for her had started so early. "Gu Nianji deserves to die. She took my place," Wen Shuyi said calmly. "She shouldn't be living in this world." Gu Nianji pursed her lips. "It seems like you took Gu Nianji's place. You're saying the opposite, aren't you?" Wen Shuyi didn't speak for a moment as if she was thinking about it. Then she said, "No, her place was mine to begin with. I'm Qin Yaoguang's biological daughter, so I should be the one engaged to young Master He." Gu Nianji took over the nest. What Wen Shuyi said now was the truest reaction from the bottom of her heart. So in her heart, she really believed that Gu Nianji was in her way. So she would kill anyone who stood in her way. Of course, she would kill anyone who stood in her way. It was similar to Gu Nianji's speculation. She looked at Wen Shuyi and asked, "Then does Qin Yaoguang know about you hunting down Gu Nianji and framing her?" Wen Shuyi suddenly giggled and said, "Of course Qin Yaoguang knows. Not only did she know, but she also did her best to help me hunt down Gu Nianji. From then on, I felt that Qin Yaoguang was too good to me. She was so good that I didn't know how to repay her." Gu Nianji scoffed and shook her head. "That's right. After all, she's willing to sacrifice her biological daughter's life to help someone who doesn't belong to the same world. This kind of biological mother is one in a million." Wen Shuyi continued, "Actually, I should have known that she was my biological mother, not Gu Nianji's biological mother. That's why I did this. I just don't understand why she tried so hard to get Gu Nianji engaged to young Master He instead of helping me. Gu Nianji was annoyed when she thought about this. She had wanted to get more clues from Wen Shuyi, but she hadn't expected Wen Shuyi to not understand either. She didn't give up and continued to ask, "Do you really not know why Qin Yaoguang tried so hard to get Gu Nianji engaged to He Zhichu? Gu Nianji was still very young at that time, right?" Wen Shuyi said calmly, "I don't know. I wanted to ask Qin Yaoguang but she refused to see me." It seemed like she really didn't know. Gu Nianji thought about it and asked in a different direction, "Does old Master Qin Beoi know about this?" Wen Shuyi was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "Maybe he knows, maybe he doesn't. I don't know." Qin Beoi had hidden himself so well? Gu Nianji cursed in her heart. It was Hua Xiaoheng's turn to ask. Hua Xiaoheng asked more about the details of Wen Shuyi pretending to be Yamaguchi Yuko and Yamaguchi Aiko and her involvement in the internal affairs of the Huaxia Empire. He looked at his records and asked coldly, "Why did you pretend to be Japanese?" Wen Shuyi didn't have Japanese genes. Lu Jin had already confirmed this. Why didn't she pretend to be an ordinary Huaxia person, but a Japanese person? This matter had been in the past for a long time. Wen Shuyi thought hard for a while before saying, "Old Master Qin told me that if I needed help, I could ask the Japanese over there for help. Young Master, he is working with the Americans from the other world. I can't work with the Americans as well. I'll be discovered by him." "So you went to the other world with young Master he not to help him find Gu Nianji. You also had your own plans?" Wen Shuyi nodded. "I never wanted Gu Nianji to come back. This was what the He father and son wanted, not what I wanted." Hua Xiaoheng immediately asked, "Who were you in contact with in Japan?" Wen Shuyi didn't say anything. Hua Xiaoheng asked in a different way, "Who did old Master Qin ask you to ask for help in Japan?" Wen Shuyi was silent for a long time, this time as if she was thinking hard. Her forehead was covered in sweat. Finally she said, "Old Master Qin didn't say who he was looking for. He asked me to contact the Japanese over there using a shortwave signal. I don't know who it is exactly. I've never seen him. I only know that his code name is Q of Hearts." Hua Xiaoheng frowned and said thoughtfully, "From what you said, could it be that not only the people from the Huaxia Empire are in contact with the other world? Are there other countries as well?" Wen Shuyi answered very quickly this time, "Yes, the United States, Japan, and Germany are all in contact with their corresponding countries in the other world to varying degrees. Their technology is just not as advanced as the Huaxia Empire's. Moreover, their technology level is not enough for them to achieve magnetic resonance." This was the first update of the day, episode 1830, The Real Reaction. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. P.S. Thank you to Only Reading Makes People Happy in Life for the 50,000 Chidian coins yesterday. Thank you for your blessings. In addition, everyone could tell that yesterday's chapter was called, "You Only Lost Your Life, But I Lost His Heart." It was sarcasm, right? This was Wen Shuyi's heartfelt thoughts. If this title was used to say that she had bad morals, she wouldn't know whether to laugh or cry. This was the standard awkward smear. Can you be more careful when you smear me? You'll be dragged out and beaten up like this, 8 o'clock at night, the second update. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1842. Hua Xiaoheng immediately thought of the trap that Reinitz and Li Dishi had set for Gu Nianji in the other world. If Reinitz hadn't fallen in love with Gu Nianji, and if He Zhichu hadn't acted quickly, Gu Nianji would have been doomed in the other world. At the time, Hua Xiaoheng had been set up and was still helping to save someone in New York. Thinking of this, Hua Xiaoheng broke out in a cold sweat. How do they contact each other? Do they have a lot of contact? Hua Xiaoheng asked worriedly. Wen Shuyi thought for a while. Probably not much. Why should I? Because there isn't enough energy. As Wen Shuyi spoke, a trace of regret appeared on her face as if she was lucky. She then added, "Not as many as the Huaxia Empire." Are you saying that countries like Germany, Japan, and the United States don't have as much high-energy magnetic field energy as the Huaxia Empire? But just because you have a lot, you can use it indiscriminately? Since when were you able to travel between the two worlds? Does General He know? Gu Nianji couldn't help interrupting. The corners of Wen Shuyi's lips curled up into a smile, but her eyes were still unfocused. She looked a little creepy. General He doesn't know. Those who knew had their memories removed by Qin Yaoguang and no one knew anymore. Gu Nianji immediately asked, "Who else knows about memory stripping surgery? How was this surgery invented in the first place?" Wen Shuyi said proudly, "Only Auntie Qin knows how." This is the Qin family's ancestral surgery. You'll have to ask Qin Yaoguang and old Mr. Qin who invented it in the first place. Lu Yuan interrupted, looks like she doesn't know much. That's normal. She only found out her identity now. Before this, Qin Yaoguang and Qin Bei couldn't have let her know so many secrets. After all, they had no intention of acknowledging her. Lu Jin rubbed his hands and waited for a while before asking, "Are you done? Once you're done, we'll proceed with the next step." Hua Xiaoheng and Gu Nianji looked at each other, and Gu Nianji nodded. That's enough. She doesn't know anything else anyway. She'll just keep repeating the same questions. Okay, then I won't ask. Hua Xiaoheng agreed. Let's go. He reached out to Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji took his broad, warm hand and walked out with him. Lu Jin and Lu Yuan began the next step of their plan. Lu Jin picked up the syringe and injected Wen Shuyi. Soon, Wen Shuyi fell into a deep sleep. Lu Yuan asked in a low voice, "What is this? Anesthetics or sedatives?" Lu Jin rolled his eyes. When she dealt with my daughter, she didn't think of using any sedatives or anesthetics. I'm giving her a taste of her own medicine now. Lu Yuan. Then what exactly is it? You won't know the specific chemical name even if I tell you. All you need to know is that this thing can make her nerve endings highly excited, and her body's senses will be magnified 100 times, but it won't make her die from pain. Lu Yuan thought for a while. Suddenly he felt a numbness on his back. He couldn't help but take a step to the side and stay away from Lu Yuan. Those who offended scientists, especially those who offended a scientist of Lu Jin's level, were truly miserable to the extreme. As Lu Jin operated on Wen Shuyi to remove all the hippocampus in her brain, he muttered in a low voice, "That's it. There's no need to choose memories to remove." Lu Yuan heard this and looked at him in surprise. You also know how to remove memories? Lu Jin glared at him. The principle of this surgery is so simple. I can understand it at a glance. The corners of Lu Yuan's eyes twitched uncontrollably. How did the surgery that had been passed down in her family become a cheap product that could be understood at a glance in his hands? Lu Jin sighed as he performed the surgery. Actually, this surgery has something to do with my old man. You mean your father, Gu Haoze? Yes, he's a psychologist and has a deep understanding of the mechanism of the human brain's memory. He proposed this principle many years ago. It's just that most people haven't thought of using this principle to remove partial memories. It's only used for psychological research. Only a scientist from a certain country would think of using crooked methods. Lu Jin curled his lips in disdain. He didn't mention which country, but Lu Yuan had already understood. The two of them quietly performed a full set of surgeries on Wen Shuyi. In addition to removing all the hippocampus in her brain, which was in charge of memory, they also destroyed the nervous system in her arms and legs, making it impossible for her to walk. They then removed her vocal cords, making it impossible for her to speak. In the end, they even made all kinds of experimental sections and placed them under a microscope as if they were observing the results. When Shuyi lay on the hospital bed, unable to move, she had no memories, but the feeling in her body was doubly clear. Every time the blade of the surgery cut into her body, she could clearly feel the pain, but she couldn't cry out. All the pain was confined to her body. She was like a huge container that only contained one thing called pain. This kind of pain was endless. As long as she was alive, this pain would continue. She screamed in her heart. She felt that she should hate someone, but she couldn't remember that name. She felt that time was long, but in fact only a few hours had passed. Suddenly, people surrounded the country house on the outskirts of New York. These people were all dressed in plain clothes, but they were all elites of the German Federal Intelligence Service. Reinitz chased after them with his men. When they broke through the door, they saw two people in white coats and masks performing surgery around the hospital bed. Freeze! Don't move! Reinitz's men shouted and pointed their guns at the two men in white coats. The two men's bodies stiffened for a moment, then they slowly turned around and raised their hands. Reinitz's men were about to walk over when the man in white standing on the left suddenly threw his right hand forward. There was a loud bang and the entire ward was filled with thick smoke. Reinitz's men covered their faces and coughed. They were choked by the thick smoke and cried. When the thick smoke dissipated, they found that the two men in white had disappeared. Only the patient they had operated on was still lying on the hospital bed. These people walked over to take a look and were immediately overjoyed. They said, "Found it. Miss One has been found." Reinitz walked over and took a quick look. He made a hand gesture. "Bring her back to Mr. Lohler." As he spoke, he took a few of his trusted subordinates and chased after them. He had just received news that a Hummer SUV had driven away from the forest path behind the house. Reinitz got into his own car and chased after the car with 2 other people. Only Lu Jin and Hua Xiaoheng were sitting in the Hummer SUV. The 2 men in white just now were also disguised by them. Lu Yuan had already taken Gu Nianji to the airport an hour ago. Lu Jin still had something to do, so Hua Xiaoheng decided to stay with him. Although Lu Jin still didn't like Hua Xiaoheng, he no longer spoke ill of him. The 2 cars drove out of the forest path and came to a natural clearing in the forest. Hua Xiaoheng turned around and raised his hand. He suddenly fired a few shots and punctured the tires of the car behind him. When the 2 men jumped out of the car to check the tires, Hua Xiaoheng knocked them out with an anesthetic gun. Reinitz was the only one left in the car. Reinitz narrowed his eyes and got out of the car. He also held a gun in his hand and said to the car in front of him, "What do you mean by luring me here on purpose?" This was the second watch of the day, episode 1831, The Revenge of the Scientists. A reminder for your monthly votes and recommendation votes. Today is Monday and recommendation votes are very important. Please vote all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1843. When Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Jin got out of the car, they were still wearing white doctor robes, but they had taken off their masks. They still looked like Slavs under the masks. Reinitz glanced at them and asked coldly in Russian, "Slavs? The KGB?" Hua Xiaoheng replied in fluent Russian, "Mr. Reinitz, don't worry. We're more interested in you, so we stopped to have a chat with you." Reinitz scoffed and waved the gun in his hand. "More interested in me? What a coincidence. I'm also very interested in you guys. How about it? Come back with me and have a good chat?" Lu Jin walked over and looked at Reinitz for a while. Suddenly, he raised his hand and waved at him. Reinitz reflexively fired back, but of course he didn't hit the target because the gas drifting from the opposite side made him momentarily dazed and sluggish. However, he quickly recovered and sneered, "Gu Nianji is indeed in cahoots with you. She also used this anesthetic spray on me. Unfortunately, this anesthetic spray doesn't work on me." It was for this reason that Lu Jin decided to have a face-to-face talk with Reinitz. The self-defense spray he had carefully prepared for Gu Nianji hadn't worked on Reinitz at all, which was why Gu Nianji had been captured by Reinitz. Lu Jin secretly remembered this great humiliation. He had to find the reason. Hua Xiaoheng was actually speechless, but he couldn't dissuade the stubborn Lu Jin, so he had no choice but to agree to his plan. Lu Jin knew very well that the anesthetic spray he had painstakingly developed was accurate enough to make an elephant lose consciousness in a minute. However, it only had less than a minute of effect on Reinitz. This was too strange. Lu Jin thought about it and decided that he could only find the answer if he talked to Reinitz personally. He raised his hand and walked forward. He said to Reinitz, "Mr. Reinitz, I have a question. Can you answer me?" The corners of Reinitz's mouth twitched. "That depends on what the question is. I have no obligation to answer any of your questions." "Yes, I know, but this time it's special. It's related to you," Lu Jin said very seriously. His typical gray-green eyes were very calm. Reinitz raised an eyebrow. "This kind of trick doesn't work on me. You'd better save it." Lu Jin wasn't discouraged. He said, "It's strange that you didn't react much to my anesthetic spray. What's so strange about that? We've received professional training, so we have a certain resistance to this anesthetic." Reinitz found it funny that the KGB scientist was staring at the anesthetic while talking about it. He really didn't know he was going to die. His men were on the way and these 2 KGB agents were doomed to die. Lu Jin shook his head and said seriously, "Impossible. No amount of training would be able to keep it from reacting to my anesthetic. You should know that my special craft allows me to paralyze an elephant in a minute. Do you think you are stronger than an elephant?" Reinitz was speechless. What kind of KGB did he run into? Lu Jin ignored Reinitz's disdain and continued, "My anesthetic is an inhaled general anesthetic. It will mix with a certain proportion of air and enter your alveoli, spread into the blood and finally flow through the blood throughout the body, paralyzing all the nervous systems. The larger the creature, the longer it takes for the whole body to be paralyzed, because size and weight determine the duration of the nervous system's effect. You might only weigh 1% of an elephant. Tell me, how did you train to be even stronger than an elephant?" Reinitz, although it sounded brain-racking, it did seem to make sense. Reinitz didn't know if he should think about this question or if he should completely ignore it. His training conflicted at this moment. As an elite of the Gestapo, he had been educated to doubt everything and not to trust anyone. Moreover, the other party was his opponent, his enemy. What they said, he had to think twice before he acted. However, what the other party said was questioning the Gestapo's training methods, or rather, the results of their training. Reinitz's expression didn't change much, but Hua Xiaoheng could tell from the change in his grip that he was already suspicious of their training methods. Hua Xiaoheng breathed a sigh of relief. Lu Jin was indeed too unexpected. The thinking of a scientist was really unpredictable. He hoped that it would be safe this time. Lu Jin took another step forward and carefully looked at Reinitz's face. He clicked his tongue and said, "Mr. Reinitz, your reaction to my special anesthetic reminds me of a plan that Germany carried out during World War II. What plan?" Reinitz asked subconsciously. The racial eugenics plan. Lu Jin took another step forward and was less than a meter away from Reinitz. Reinitz took a step back. He was still holding the gun in his hand, but the muzzle was no longer pointed at Lu Jin. "You mean the plan that the Führer once carried out?" "Yes. The crazy plan that your German Führer once carried out. But that plan has long since failed. Are you really not stalling for time by saying this now?" Reinitz raised the gun and aimed it at Lu Jin's forehead. Lu Jin smiled and patted Reinitz on the shoulder. He quietly held a few strands of light blonde hair on his shoulder in his palm and said, "Why should I stall for time? Your condition reminds me of a distant story that I want to share with you." Reinitz could already hear the voices of his own people in his earphones. He knew that they were already approaching in this direction and were about to surround this place. He felt relieved and smiled to stall for time. "Really? Then tell me about it." Lu Jin smiled and said, "It's like this. The person who presided over this racial eugenics plan for your Führer was a young scientist named Li Deshi. Reinitz, his immediate superior who was also his godfather, was also called Li Deshi. What did he have to do with the Li Deshi that the KGB mentioned?" Lu Jin continued, "This Li Deshi really wanted to revive the German royal family, the Hohenzollern family. He chose an outstanding man from the Hohenzollern family and mated with hundreds of blonde, blue-eyed German women who had been selected. They had many children. They conducted a genetic screening of these children, and in the end only one child survived. After World War II, their plan had to go underground and was renamed the Spring Sprouts Project. They established an orphanage and accepted funding from the Rohrer family. This child who survived grew up and gave birth to many children in the same way. After a genetic screening, only one child survived. This last child wasn't an ordinary child. His genes had been screened and perhaps they had also been improved and optimized. That's why he was smarter, more sensitive, able to fight and able to resist than the average person. This child was able to resist the anesthetic specially made by our KGB. This isn't something that an ordinary person can do. Only a genetically modified super soldier can do it." "Where do you think this child is now? What's his name?" Reinitz's pupils constricted. Spring Sprouts Project, orphanage, what familiar terms? He grew up in the Spring Sprouts orphanage. He had never seen his parents, nor did he have any relatives or friends. What did the KGB mean? Lu Jin deliberately waited for a while before saying, "You didn't expect this, did you? This child is in front of me now. His name is Reinitz Hohenzollern." Reinitz's hand gradually tightened around the gun, and the veins on the back of his hand bulged. He pressed the gun against Lu Jin's forehead and gritted his teeth. "You really know how to make up stories. Unfortunately, I'm not a person who likes to read novels." His fingers tightened and he was about to pull the trigger. At this moment, Lu Jin's gaze became very deep. His pupils were as black as ink and bottomless. He chanted softly, and a series of incomprehensible sentences came out of his mouth. Reinitz was highly nervous, but he was still distracted. At the same time, Reinitz's men had already narrowed the encirclement and were closing in on the open space. Hua Xiaoheng gestured for Lu Jin to put on a mask, then took out Lu Jin's special spray and sprayed it around. Soon many people fell to the ground in the forest. They were all Reinitz's men. Reinitz came back to his senses and roared. He raised his hand and fired several shots in Hua Xiaoheng's direction. Hua Xiaoheng kicked a nearby tree and jumped up. At the same time he fired several shots in Reinitz's direction. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged a few blows. Hua Xiaoheng was unharmed, but Reinitz's cheek had already been grazed by a stray bullet. He wiped it with the back of his hand and saw the blood on the back of his hand. He snorted coldly and suddenly took out a miniature grenade from his trouser pocket. He threw it in Lu Jin's direction. With a loud bang, the grenade let out a deafening explosion. Reinitz's movements were too fast. Hua Xiaoheng didn't have time to intercept the grenade. In a moment of desperation he flew up and pulled Lu Jin away. He used his back to help Lu Jin block the flying debris from the grenade. With a muffled groan, he also raised his hand and threw out a smoky tear gas grenade. Then he pulled Lu Jin into the car, stepped on the accelerator and sped away. Reinitz didn't have a mask. He couldn't open his eyes at all because of the tear gas. When he opened his eyes, he found that the 2 KGB agents had disappeared without a trace. In the clearing in the forest, only his car stood quietly. The surroundings were littered with people who had been knocked out by that man's special anesthetic. Reinitz walked over with a dark expression and kicked the man closest to him. He kicked the man into the air, but when the man landed he was still unconscious. Reinitz was horrified. His subordinates were all trained to resist anesthetics like him. He knew very well that the normal anesthetics on the market didn't work on them. However, Lu Jin's anesthetics seemed to be stronger than the normal anesthetics on the market. But why didn't it work on him? Reinitz knew that he shouldn't be influenced by the enemy's words, but he couldn't help but think. The habit of suspecting everything had already penetrated deep into his bones. He couldn't help but wonder what was going on with Chun Miao Orphanage, Li Dishi and the super soldier that the man had mentioned. Lu Jin and Hua Xiaoheng finally returned to his penthouse apartment in New York Central Park. As soon as he entered, Hua Xiaoheng fell to the ground. His white coat had already been taken off, revealing the black t-shirt and camouflage pants he was wearing underneath. Gu Nianji quickly ran over to help him up. Her hand accidentally rubbed against his back, and her hand was instantly covered in blood. Major General Hua. Gu Nianji called out in a trembling voice, "Dad! What happened to Major General Hua?" This was the first update of the day, issue 1832, The Mind of a Scientist. A reminder for the monthly votes and recommendation votes. 8 o'clock in the evening, the second update. Moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1844. Lu Jin suddenly thought of the grenade that Reinitz had thrown. His eyelids twitched and he quickly followed him to help Hua Xiaoheng up. He said, "Hurry up and prepare the operating room." As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Yuan had already run over. He carried Hua Xiaoheng on his back before Lu Jin and ran towards Lu Jin's laboratory and operating room. Gu Nianji wanted to follow, but Lu Jin pushed her away. He frowned and said, "Don't cause trouble. With me here he won't die." Gu Nianji's tears flowed down her face. She thought it should be fine, but she couldn't help feeling confused. A wave of panic welled up in her heart, and her mind was in a mess. She couldn't care less about many things she wanted to ask. Lu Jin and Lu Yuan entered the laboratory and operating room and closed the door tightly. Gu Nianji leaned against the wall by the door and thought about how Hua Xiaoheng must have felt the same way when she had been shot and her life was uncertain. It was such a terrible feeling. She would rather have been the one lying unconscious inside. 4 hours later, the door finally opened. Gu Nianji turned around and saw that the first person to walk out was Lu Jin. She quickly rushed over and asked, "Dad, what happened to Major General Hua? Is he okay now?" She looked at Lu Jin eagerly. Her usually cheerful little face was wrinkled, and only worry and uneasiness could be seen. Lu Jin took out a tissue from his pocket to wipe her tears with lingering fear. He said guiltily, "It's okay. He'll be fine tomorrow after he sleeps." Gu Nianji choked and nodded. "Thank you, Dad." Lu Jin's hand paused and his lips parted. After a while he muttered, "Don't thank me. It's all my fault. If it weren't for my stubborn insistence, he wouldn't have been hurt." Gu Nianji, she looked at Lu Jin eagerly. She wanted to know why, but seeing how uncomfortable Lu Jin looked, she didn't want to add more psychological burden to him. However, she had underestimated Lu Jin's tolerance. Lu Jin took the initiative to say, "I wanted to stab a thorn in Reinitz's heart so that he could rebel against Li Dishi, so I suggested contacting Reinitz. I didn't expect Reinitz to be so strong-willed. With so much evidence in front of him, he still did what he had to do and threw a grenade at me." Gu Nianji's heart jumped into her throat. She clenched her fists and covered her chest as she asked in a trembling voice, Are you okay? Do you want to have a checkup?" At this critical juncture, she was still concerned about his irresponsible father's health. Lu Jin couldn't help but feel even more guilty. He patted Gu Nianji's head. "Good girl, I'm fine. It was Major General Hua who helped me block the grenade." Gu Nianji had been mentally prepared, but when she heard that he had blocked a grenade, the tightness in her heart snapped. Her vision darkened, and her body softly fell to the ground. Lu Jin quickly picked her up and turned to enter the operating theater. Lu Yuan was taking care of Hua Xiaoheng inside, carefully wiping the blood off his body. Hearing the sound of the door, he turned around and saw Lu Jin carrying Gu Nianji in. He frowned and asked, "What's wrong with Nianji? Wasn't she fine just now?" Lu Jin said awkwardly, "I told her the truth about Major General Hua's injury. She was scared." "Lu Yuan, how can you tell such a thing to a little girl?" He glared at Lu Jin angrily. Major General Hua is her sweetheart. This kind of injury was doubly fatal. It was rare for Lu Jin not to argue with him. He silently placed Gu Nianji on the other bed in the operating theater. Fortunately, Gu Nianji was just angry. As soon as Lu Jin placed her on the hospital bed, she opened her eyes and woke up. She looked at Lu Jin with tears in her eyes and held his hand. She asked pitifully, "Dad, is Major General Hua okay? The grenade didn't hit him, did it?" No, he was just injured in the back by shrapnel." Lu Jin had learned his lesson and didn't tell him everything about Hua Xiaoheng's injuries. Lu Yuan breathed a sigh of relief and carried the basin to pour water. Gu Nianji didn't see that the basin had almost turned into a basin of blood. Hua Xiaoheng's back was wounded like a beehive. Fortunately, they were wearing bulletproof vests inside, which protected the key parts. His injuries were much better than Gu Nianji's last time. However, the parts that weren't protected by the bulletproof vest were bleeding too much. He held on until he brought Lu Jin home before fainting on the ground. With Lu Jin around, this level of injury was not worth mentioning. However, there was no doubt that excessive blood loss would damage his body. Gu Nianji turned to look at Hua Xiaoheng, who was lying on the hospital bed. From her angle, she couldn't see Hua Xiaoheng's face. She could only see the back of his head. She pursed her lips to stop the tears that were welling up. She lowered her eyes and said, "Dad, I'm fine. Go and rest for a while." After a tense escape, Lu Jin had undergone 4 hours of surgery. His body really couldn't hold on any longer. However, he didn't want to leave Gu Nianji at this time. He said no need, but he couldn't help falling asleep on the edge of her hospital bed. The operating theater was silent for a moment. Lu Yuan sat in front of Hua Xiaoheng's hospital bed to take care of him. Lu Jin was lying in front of Gu Nianji's hospital bed, asleep. Gu Nianji had also experienced a series of twists and turns today. She had been very nervous and in the end she couldn't take it anymore and fell asleep. When she woke up the next day, she subconsciously looked in Hua Xiaoheng's direction. He had also woken up. He was still lying on the hospital bed, but he turned his head to look in her direction. Gu Nianji had never felt such a gentle gaze from Hua Xiaoheng's eyes. His gaze seemed to have reached out a hand and was gently comforting her. Gu Nianji felt her scalp tingle and closed her eyes in embarrassment. From the corner of her eye, she saw that Lu Jin was still sleeping soundly on the edge of her hospital bed. She suddenly smelled the fragrance of egg-fried rice. She immediately perked up and her eyes sparkled like stars. Hua Xiaoheng looked at her quietly and curled his lips slightly. He just liked to see her lively and curious about everything. Gu Nianji sniffled and whispered, "President Lu went to make breakfast?" It was a rare feast to be able to eat egg-fried rice for breakfast. Hua Xiaoheng nodded. His voice was even deeper and more magnetic with a hint of hoarseness. "Yes, he went to make it. Can you get up and walk?" Gu Nianji moved her legs. Although they were extremely sore and weak, she could still move them. Gu Nianji gently lifted the blanket and wanted to get out of bed. Her movements were already very gentle, but she still woke Lu Jin up. He looked up sleepily and saw that Gu Nianji was about to put on her slippers. His body jerked and he instinctively bent down to put the slippers on for her. He mumbled, "You must be starving, right? Hurry up and go eat." Gu Nianji, she suddenly felt that in Major General Hua and Lu Jin's hearts she was a foodie. When she arrived at the dining room, she saw that Lu Yuan had indeed prepared breakfast. He had even made a large casserole of angelica and ginger mutton soup for Hua Xiaoheng. Gu Nianji smelled it and smiled. President Lu's cooking is amazing. Lu Yuan became even more kind to her. "Hurry up and eat. You've obviously lost a lot of weight since yesterday." Gu Nianji, losing weight wasn't good? She touched her face and suddenly didn't want to eat. Lu Yuan smiled and shook his head. He scooped a bowl of angelica mutton soup for Hua Xiaoheng and skimmed off the oil on it. There was only clear soup. After a while, Lu Jin also staggered out and sat next to Gu Nianji. He carefully looked at her face and said fawningly, "Nianji, are you still angry?" Gu Nianji, she wasn't angry. She was just scared. Gu Nianji quickly shook her head and said, "No, Dad, I'm not angry. I'm just worried about you and Major General Hua. Come, let's have breakfast. She was obviously in much better spirits. Her eyes were curved when she smiled. She really didn't look angry. Lu Jin was still a little uneasy and continued to apologize. It's my fault. I shouldn't have dragged Major General Hua into danger. Gu Nianji heard that something was wrong and quickly said, Dad, you can't go into danger alone. Otherwise, why would we chase after you? Have you forgotten? She held Lu Jin's hand and found that his palm was cold. Lu Yuan came out at this moment. Seeing that Lu Jin was really guilty, he snorted and said, Major General Hua is fine, but you really can't do this in the future. Reinitz isn't Qin Yaoguang or Wen Shuyi. He's an elite intelligence agent who has been professionally trained. It's too whimsical of you to shake his position with just a few words. Gu Nianji saw that Lu Jin was embarrassed and quickly changed the topic. Dad, then why did you remove all of Wen Shuyi's hippocampus and make her completely lose her memory? Isn't it good to keep her memory? To let her know how precious she is. Lu Jin quickly glanced at Lu Yuan. Seeing that he didn't mention Hua Xiaoheng anymore, he breathed a sigh of relief and quickly said, I did this to make sure nothing goes wrong. After all, Wen Shuyi is going to be left for Lorraine to experiment on. And his laboratory has the world's top biomedical talents. What if a genius also appears in their laboratory in the future and cures Wen Shuyi? You have to know that biological cultivation of human tissues is no longer a problem. Only by physically removing her hippocampus can they ensure that they can't repair her memory cells. Otherwise, it will always be a disaster in the future. Gu Nianji, this was the second watch of the day, episode 1833, Stabbing a Thorn. A reminder for the monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1845. Lu Yuan looked at Lu Jin approvingly. Lu Jin was an amazing genius and very conceited, but he never thought that he was at the top of the world. He didn't look down on other scientists, and he was always vigilant about the development of science. Only such a person could remain invincible forever. Gu Nianji asked curiously, is it really impossible to recover memories after removing all the hippocampus in the brain? There are cells in the hippocampus that are responsible for memory. These cells are the carriers of memories. If they're gone, where can they recover memories? Lu Jin said in amusement. If the skin doesn't exist, where can the hair go? Gu Nianji thought about it for a moment and said, so that means that even if one of them can wake her up, she won't have any memories. Not only will she not have any memories, but she won't have any new memories. Lu Jin's expression turned cold. Just like an idiot, her brain is a hole. Wind can pass through it, water can flow through it, and nothing will be left behind. Gu Nianji shivered. How ruthless. Amnesia was nothing compared to this. No memories, but she has consciousness. This is worse. Lu Yuan didn't want to talk about this topic anymore. He said, Nianji and I went to the airport and made arrangements. When are we going back? They had been in the United States long enough. Lu Jin glanced at them and hesitated for a moment. He didn't hide it anymore and said, we'll have to face the Qin family when we go back. Right now, only the Qin family knows the truth about Nianji and Wen Shuyi. To be precise, it's the two big shots of the Qin family, Qin Yaoguang and Qin Bei. You mean our trick can fool Lorraine but we can't fool Qin Yaoguang and Qin Bei? Lu Yuan said thoughtfully. His fingers tapped on the dining table. The smile on his face didn't change, but he had already made the final decision. Then these two can't be kept. He said it casually as if he was just talking about the fate of the two trash cans. Gu Nianji had completely lost her temper. The people in this room were all powerful. She couldn't afford to offend them. After dinner, Lu Jin went to another room in the laboratory to conduct a DNA test on Reinitz's hair. A day later, the results of his test were out. He said to Gu Nianji emotionally, as expected, Reinitz's genes were also selected. However, the opponent's skills weren't up to par, so Reinitz's genes were flawed. His body's functions have been stimulated too much, but the corresponding genes have not been significantly strengthened. Therefore, there is already a hidden disease in his body. Lu Jin looked at Reinitz's DNA fragment and shook his head regretfully. Something's wrong with the hematopoietic mechanism. He won't be able to live for long. Gu Nianji subconsciously thought of Reinitz in the other world. That person is now a priest. I wonder if there is anything wrong with his body? Can't this disease be treated? Gu Nianji asked in confusion. It's leukemia, right? It's not an incurable disease, right? In the last century, leukemia had been rampant for a time, but now there were many drugs and treatments that could cure leukemia. Lu Jin shrugged. There's a problem with his genes. It's a problem at the root. Of course we have to treat it at the root. Otherwise we'll just treat the symptoms and not the root cause and everything will be over. Gu Nianji looked at Lu Jin. She wanted to say something but she shut her mouth tightly. Lu Jin knew what she wanted to say and patted her on the shoulder. How about this? If Reinitz lets you go, I'll do him a favor. Otherwise let him die. If Lu Jin said let him die, then he would really die. Gu Nianji wanted to laugh but she couldn't. She forced a smile and said, he harmed Major General Hua. This can't be forgiven. Lu Yuan laughed. This is because each serves his own master. Xiaoheng suffered a small setback in his hands so he can be considered to be incompetent. When he recovers I'll give him some special training. Gu Nianji rubbed her forehead and said helplessly, President Lu, don't say such nice things. If something really happened to Major General Hua, would you casually say that each serves his own master? You must have torn Reinitz to pieces long ago, right? Lu Yuan picked up the newspaper non-committally and said with a smile, peace is the most important thing in business. Am I such an unscrupulous person? Don't accuse me of anything. Lu Jin looked at the DNA fragments he had tested one by one, feeling elated. He praised himself, look at these images. They're perfect. I've never seen another person make such a perfect picture. Gu Nianji. Lu Yuan. Lu Jin had enough of Reinitz's DNA fragments, so he sent them to him via encrypted email. Of course, Lu Jin used an unfamiliar account with a hidden IP address. At that moment, Reinitz was standing in the underground laboratory of the Lola Corporation. Next to him stood Lola, who looked obsessed. On a fully equipped operating table in the laboratory lay Wen Shui, who was lying motionless. A few biogeneticists in white coats said excitedly, it really is the work of the KGB. Her hippocampus has actually been removed. That's great. It saved us a lot of effort. TSK, this surgery was really impressive. The hippocampus was cut clean. One look and you can tell that it's someone who does a lot of work. That's not all. Look, the nervous system of her arms and legs has also been perfectly destroyed, and her vocal cords have also been removed. They're using her as an experiment subject. We've done many experiments ourselves, but I've never seen an experiment subject that's so perfectly prepared. A few scientists surrounded Wen Shui's body and were full of praise. Also look at her shoulder. She clearly suffered a gunshot wound, but it's healing at an astonishing speed. Is this the power of the perfect gene? Everyone was talking at once. They praised the KGB scientists for their excellent surgery, and at the same time, they were glad that they had recaptured the body with the perfect gene. From now on, they would have enough work to do for the next 50 years. Thinking about how many world-shocking discoveries they would make, these scientists were so excited that they couldn't even hold the scalpel steadily. Lola admired the rare loss of composure of the usually arrogant scientists in his laboratory. He asked, then can we release her gene map for external agencies to verify and review? The chief scientist in the laboratory nodded and said mysteriously, of course, but don't release a complete gene map. Just a few fragments will do. To prove the perfect gene doesn't mean that we have to hand over all of our experimental results. Lola was in a better mood and couldn't help but ask, but why did you say that the DNA sample had a lot of problems and wasn't the closest sample to the perfect gene? The chief scientist was a little embarrassed. His eyes wandered and he chuckled. Well, it's a long story. Because we've never seen the perfect gene, we can't be blamed. Huh. So you're saying that you made a mistake before? Lola rarely saw his chief scientist embarrassed and couldn't help but laugh. The chief scientist's lips twitched. Well, we still have to continue observing and testing. Now that we have the closest test subject to the perfect gene, all problems can be easily solved. That's good, that's good. Lola admired the scientist's experiments for a while more before leaving the laboratory with Reinitz. The two of them walked out of the Lola Group's building. The sky was filled with stars and it was already late at night. Lola said happily to Reinitz, I'm very satisfied this time. As expected, I still need you to do it. I'll talk to your godfather, Li Dishi, later and ask him when he's retiring. It's time to give up his position and let the younger people achieve greater results. Reinitz bowed slightly. Thank you, Mr. Lola. I'm still young and I still like working on the front lines. I don't want to sit in the office and give orders for the time being. That's okay. You can still do the frontline work if you take over. No one can control you. You can make your own decisions, isn't that good? Lola was in a much better mood and pushed all kinds of praise onto Reinitz. Reinitz didn't even bother to talk to Lola anymore. He just silently thought about Lu Jin's words. After sending Lola back to his mansion in Manhattan, Reinitz went to the luxury area of Central Park. He stood under a street lamp next to a small flower bed and silently smoked. He didn't take the words of the KGB of the Soviet Union to heart, but because of his habit of suspecting everything, he hacked into his own system and found the Spring Seedling program from back then. He also found his own DNA data map. When he saw the folder labeled Top Secret A, and found that it contained his genetic data, he suddenly felt like the whole world had turned upside down in front of him. In addition to his genetic data, he also found the genetic data of his father and mother. The two of them were long gone. He thought they had really died in a car accident, but now he knew that they had actually all died of illness. People born in their race's eugenics program didn't seem to live long lives. Most of them died before they were 30, and a few lived until they were close to 40. But none of them were over 40. Reinitz thought about his own age. He was already 30 years old. Would he die before he was 40, just like his predecessors? Reinitz's mind was in a mess and he didn't know what to do. He took out a small transparent plastic bag from his pocket. There was a strand of black hair in it. The hair was very hard. Although it had been several days since it left its owner, its luster had not diminished. It was so black that it shone. It wasn't Slav's hair, but it was from the Slavs who had spoken to him. The phone screen suddenly lit up, indicating that an email had come in. This was the first chapter of the day, episode 1834, If the Skin Does Not Exist, Where Will the Hair Attach Itself to? A reminder for everyone about your monthly votes and recommendation votes. 8 o'clock in the evening. P.S. Thanks to McMug Loves Blue for tipping me 10,000 starter coins yesterday. Congratulations to McMug Loves Blue for becoming the 30th leader of Hello Major General. I wrote it down in my notebook. I wonder how many Alliance Masters there will be by the end of this book. Will it be enough to start a Alliance Master group? Moi, everyone little angels. Chapter 1846. Reinitz looked down at the phone in his hand and saw that it was an email from a stranger. He was slightly surprised. His phone and his email were all specially made and confidential. Someone could actually use an unfamiliar address to send it in. He swiped open his phone and opened the email. After confirming that the email was free of viruses, he clicked on it. A set of pictures appeared. It was the gene map he had just seen. It was also his own gene map. There was no nonsense in the email. It only clearly pointed out which gene fragments had problems, what the problems were, why the problems were, and finally what these problems would do to his health. Reinitz's pupils constricted as he looked at the last shocking sentence. Leukemia? He would get leukemia? However, when he thought of the top-secret information he had just found in his own system and how the people who passed this experiment did not live long, he had no choice but to believe it. Leukemia was not a difficult disease, nor was it an incurable disease. However, there were many types of leukemia. The causes were different, the treatment methods were different, and the treatment results were also different. For people like him, the person clearly wrote in the email that the only way was through gene therapy, and the people on Reinitz's side had yet to master this method. Who was this person? Reinitz's gaze fell on the small transparent plastic bag in his other hand. There was a strand of hard black hair there. Was it that person? That Slavic KGB of the Soviet Union? Reinitz narrowed his eyes and looked at the unfamiliar email address on his phone, as well as the even more unfamiliar IP address. He pressed the reply button. He wrote in the reply email, I have your hair. You're not Slavic. You're Asian. An Asian with this kind of ability and capability must be Chinese. What's your intention for pretending to be from the KGB of the Soviet Union? He expressionlessly clicked send, then sat on the bench and smoked one cigarette after another. Not long after Lu Jin sent the email, he received a reply from Reinitz. He had wanted to set this email address to not be able to reply, but on second thought, why bother? Anyway, his IP address was hidden. The other party definitely didn't know where he was, so there was no need to set it. Reinitz was truly a skilled and daring man. He actually replied immediately. Lu Jin opened the email happily, thinking that his threat had succeeded. However, when he read the contents of the email, Lu Jin's face darkened. What's wrong? Lu Yuan knew Lu Jin's emotional changes very well. He was in this line of work and he was familiar with Lu Jin's usual behavior, so he quickly realized that something was wrong with Lu Jin's emotions. Lu Jin said angrily, Look at Reinitz. So savage. You actually counterattacked. Why did you counterattack? Lu Yuan leaned over and poked his head out to take a look. Why does he have your hair? Lu Yuan was also surprised. When did this happen? Lu Jin said with a bitter face. I think it was probably because when I went to get his hair, he also quietly got his hair from me. Lu Yuan pursed his lips and said mockingly, I advised you to shave your head, but you refused. Why would I shave it? Why do you have to shave your head if a mask can solve the problem? Lu Jin flew into a rage and said fiercely to the email on his phone, You want to threaten me? You're dead. The point is that a mask didn't solve your problem. Now that your hair is in Reinitz's hands, what do you think we should do? Gun Yanji's head hurt when she heard this. She quickly said, Great Buddhas, can we talk nicely? Reinitz has Dad's hair. We can't ignore this. Gun Yanji was even more nervous than Reinitz had her hair. What's there to worry about? Lu Jin glared at his phone angrily. Let him die. Dad, have you thought about it? If he has your hair, he'll know that those two, Slavic KGB, are fake. At the same time, he'll know that these two are mostly Chinese. Gun Yanji patiently analyzed and explained, if we test your DNA again and contact the Wuxia Empire, your identity might be exposed. Lu Jin was the dead Gu Xiangwen in the Wuxia Empire. He had escaped with his life. Otherwise, why would he Qingjian stop investigating? Gun Yanji thought about her background and the unverified biological mother Qin Suwen's relationship with He Qingjian. She felt a headache coming on. Lu Yuan was slightly taken aback. He nodded and said, Yanji has such a fast brain. She analyzes things faster than me. Actually, he was basically thinking the same thing as Gun Yanji. However, with his age, experience, he could only think the same as Gun Yanji. This was already enough to show that Gun Yanji's intelligence was above his expectations. Gun Yanji waved her hand nonchalantly. President Lu, now isn't the time to talk about this. I don't want Dad's identity to be exposed. We have to think of a way to win Reinitz over. As she spoke, she told him about what had happened with Reinitz. She had only told him about how she had been hunted down in the Alps and how Reinitz had set a trap to intercept her. After Reinitz found out about his background, he turned from an enemy to a friend. Not only did he help Gun Yanji hide the truth, but he also left the German Federal Intelligence Agency and became a priest in the church. After she finished speaking, Gun Yanji asked, Dad, if the lives of the corresponding people in the two worlds are the same, do they make the same choices? Lu Jin spread out his hands and said honestly, I really don't know about that. This isn't in the field of biological genetics. It's in the field of behavioral science and psychology. If your grandfather was still alive, he might be able to make some guesses. I can't. I haven't worked hard in this area. He could hypnotize people because he knew how, but he didn't know why. Gun Yanji thought about it for a moment, then looked up and said, Then I'll go see Reinitz. Dad's hair must be taken back. It's always a disaster if it falls into his hands. I'll go. Lu Yuan put down the newspaper and said implicitly, I have more experience, and if Reinitz refuses to give up, it'll be easier for me to deal with him. Gun Yanji froze for a moment and objected flatly, President Lu, none of you should see him. This will give him an opportunity. We don't have enough manpower in the United States, and even Major General Hua is injured. We can't continue to take risks. But your father's hair. Don't you really want it back? Lu Yuan smiled and said, I'm already used to dealing with your father's aftermath. Gun Yanji, she was very grateful to Lu Yuan, but she still said firmly, No, we'll think of another way. You can't go see him, I can't, and Dad can't. Gun Yanji glared at Lu Jin as she spoke. Lu Jin raised his hands reflexively. His eyes were especially innocent. I didn't. Don't talk nonsense. I won't, Gun Yanji snorted. It's good that you know. Anyway, we definitely have another way to deal with this matter. There's a way to make Reinitz stop by not seeing him. And now that he's taking the initiative to see him, Reinitz knows that the hair in his hand isn't just proof that the KGB of the Soviet Union is fake. He's going to hang him up and sell him. Gun Yanji frowned and racked her brains for a solution. Lu Yuan saw that she was adamantly rejecting everyone's direct contact with Reinitz, and he didn't want her, a young girl in her 20s, to worry about them who were in their 20s, so he didn't continue to insist. After thinking for a while, he raised his eyes and said calmly, Then there's only one way. Equivalent exchange. This is the second watch of the day, number 1835, an email from a stranger. A reminder for everyone about your monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi, everyone, little angels. Chapter 1847. Equivalent exchange? Gu Nianji had just repeated it when she heard Lu Jin shout, "What equivalent exchange? I don't agree. Let him die." Gu Nianji suddenly understood. President Lu means to exchange his leukemia treatment method? Lu Yuan nodded and completely ignored Lu Jin, who was stomping his feet in anger. "I said I don't agree." Lu Jin was so angry that he was incoherent. "I don't agree, I don't agree, I don't agree. I never take threats." Lu Yuan nonchalantly reopened the newspaper and blocked his view. He said to Gu Nianji, "Reason with your father." Gu Nianji, she looked at the steady Lu Yuan, then at Lu Jin, who had a look of rejection on his face. She felt a dull pain in her temples. However, Gu Nianji was Lu Jin's biological daughter after all. She quickly rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "That's right, what equivalent exchange? Where's the equivalent exchange? I don't agree either." Lu Yuan lowered the newspaper in his hand. He peeked out from the top of the newspaper and looked at Gu Nianji quietly. Lu Jin's anger turned to joy and he said happily, "Right? Look, even my girl agrees with me. I've confirmed that she's really my biological daughter." Gu Nianji, "Dad, don't go online so much in the future." Gu Nianji coughed lightly and looked at Lu Jin fawningly. "Of course it's not an equivalent exchange. My father's life is much more important than Reinitz's. Reinitz's life is at most worth a strand of my father's hair, right?" "Of course." Lu Jin patted Gu Nianji's shoulder vigorously. "My girl is right. Then you'll listen to me?" Gu Nianji quickly followed. "We'll use Reinitz's life in exchange for a strand of your hair. Come to think of it, you're the one who's profiting." Lu Jin, it sounded like something was wrong, but the logic was irreproachable. Lu Jin immediately fell into a logical loop of, is his hair more important? Or Reinitz's life is more important? Then he agreed to help Gu Nianji design a gene therapy that could specifically treat Reinitz's special type of leukemia. After coming out of Lu Jin's laboratory, Gu Nianji sat directly in front of Hua Xiaoheng's bed and tucked him in. She rarely saw Hua Xiaoheng injured. It wasn't that Hua Xiaoheng had never been injured before, but whenever he was seriously injured during a mission, he would recover before stopping to see Gu Nianji. What she had seen were only minor injuries. This was the first time she had seen such an injury. The miniature grenade Reinitz used was especially powerful. Although Hua Xiaoheng tried his best to avoid it, he was still injured by the shrapnel on his back that wasn't covered by the bulletproof vest. His face was pale, and his lips were so pale that they were almost transparent. These were all symptoms of severe blood loss. Lu Jin did not give him a blood transfusion. Instead, he used an alternative treatment to directly stimulate the body's hematopoietic system, speed up his metabolism, and stimulate his own blood circulation. This treatment was much safer than blood transfusion, but it also required much more medical skill. Lu Yuan also walked in and stood in front of Hua Xiaoheng's bed. He put his hands in his trouser pockets and said softly, "Where's your father?" "He's designing his gene therapy in the laboratory," Gu Nianji also whispered. "I'll contact Reinitz. It's better if you don't show up. I don't want Reinitz to think of you." Gu Nianji was extremely afraid of Reinitz. Although Lu Yuan was also an expert in this field, Reinitz had met Lu Yuan before. If Reinitz saw through Lu Yuan, the chances of Lu Jin being exposed would be even higher. Like Lu Jin, Gu Nianji didn't want such a situation to happen. "But I'm even more worried if you show up." Lu Yuan objected. "This kind of thing is too dangerous. It's better if I show up." "No need." Gu Nianji lowered her eyes and said lightly, "I'm not surprised by Reinitz at all. But you're different. I don't want him to find out more." Lu Yuan thought about it for a long time and said, "Then if you want to see him, I have to stay close to you and accompany you." "That's no problem. Just don't show up." After Gu Nianji finished her discussion with Lu Yuan, she got to work. However, before she could go to the bank to rent a safe deposit box, she received a call from Reinitz. "Miss Gu? Do you have time to chat? I have a strand of hair here. I'm sure you'll be very interested." At this point, Gu Nianji had no choice but to go. The place where Reinitz was meeting her was next to a small flower bed in front of a five-star hotel in New York. There were people coming and going here and it was very lively and bustling. Gu Nianji saw Reinitz the moment she got out of the taxi. He was wearing a medium-length Burberry windbreaker. It seemed like he hadn't slept for a long time. The dark circles under his eyes were obvious, and his thin face was covered in stubble. However, he didn't look sloppy. He only looked unruly. Separated by a small flower bed, she was on this side and he was on the other side. The flower bed was filled with tulips of all colors, and they were in full bloom. The sky was dark, and the rose-purple sunset illuminated half the sky. Reinitz was holding a cigarette in his hand. He flicked the ash off and narrowed his blue eyes with a smile. You haven't left yet. He thought Gunyenji had fled New York long ago. In fact, he had received news that Gunyenji had already flown back to the Wuxia Empire with another person. Gunyenji knew that she and Lu Yuan had gone to the airport and fooled a lot of people. She hadn't thought that she would be able to fool Reinitz, but she hadn't expected him to call her directly. Are you here to arrest me? Gunyenji pretended to be uneasy. But I'm just helping the Soviet KGB, Reinitz sneered and raised his hand to stop her. Stop acting with me. I know your accomplice is from the Wuxia Empire, not the Soviet Union. Gunyenji retorted calmly, there are also Wuxia Empire people in the KGB. For example, there was a woman surnamed Xie in the KGB's upper echelons. She was Wuxia Empire. She was talking about Xie Zian from this world. Hua Xiaoheng later told her that Xie Zian from this world had indeed joined the KGB, but she had never married or had children in her life. She had also passed away a long time ago. The fake news about Xie Zian's marriage and children in the KGB had been deliberately released to cover up Hua Xiaoheng's identity. Reinitz shrugged. So what if I am? Why don't we test the DNA of this strand of hair? He took out a small transparent plastic bag and shook it in front of Gunyenji. Gunyenji's eyes flashed and she smiled. Mr. Reinitz is really amazing. He can threaten us with a strand of hair from anywhere. I'm impressed. She cupped her hands with a relaxed expression. Reinitz was slightly taken aback. Was this hair really not important? He wasn't fooled by Gunyenji's expression and continued to probe. How about we make a deal? You have to make a deal for a strand of hair. Gunyenji shook her head. Then if I cut a piece of meat from you, will you step down and give up your position? Reinitz, if you don't want it, then I'll have to give this strand of hair to the CIA. How about that? Even if it's the KGB of the Chinese, the CIA will definitely be interested, right? Reinitz's first plan had failed, so he thought of another one. Gunyenji finally showed some fear, but she still pretended to be fierce and said, Go tell them. See if they care about you. Then I'll report them. Reinitz pretended to take out his phone and dial the number. Gunyenji said anxiously, Okay. I'm scared of you. What kind of deal do you want to make? Reinitz narrowed his eyes and looked her up and down. His voice sank. Was the person who told me I was sick the owner of this strand of hair? Gunyenji didn't deny it. What do you want? What do you want to exchange this strand of hair for? Since he can tell I'm sick, he should have a cure. Reinitz said slowly. Tell me the cure and I'll return the hair to you. Gunyenji's eyes widened. Are you kidding me? A strand of hair in exchange for a life? Why don't you go to heaven? She turned around to leave angrily. Reinitz quickly stopped her and said patiently, You can't make the decision. You go tell him that I'm very sincere about making a deal with him. Gunyenji stopped in her tracks and looked back at Reinitz. She suddenly laughed. A strand of hair isn't enough to make a deal unless you can give me something else. That depends on how much your life is worth. Gunyenji deliberately didn't say what she wanted, and she wasn't in a hurry to get the hair back. This attitude greatly eased Reinitz's suspicions. He hadn't planned on using just this strand of hair to exchange for resources that could save his life, but how could he rest assured if he didn't test it? On the contrary, if the other party agreed immediately, he would know that the owner of this strand of hair was very important to Gunyenji and the others. Then he would really be hung up and sold. Reinitz took a puff of his cigarette and casually threw the plastic bag over. Okay, this is my first step of sincerity. Gunyenji caught the plastic bag and nodded. Yes, your sincerity is proportional to your hair? Reinitz smiled and shook his head. I only have this strand of hair. It's up to you whether you believe it or not. Gunyenji spread her hands and said, It doesn't matter if I believe it or not. The key is whether you want to live or not. The smile on Reinitz's face faded. How could I not want to live? But how do I know that your method can save my life? The fact that you came to us means that you believe it. Gunyenji guided him patiently. So come on. Show me your sincerity. Reinitz watched as Gunyenji waved for a taxi and left. He didn't try to follow Gunyenji because to him now, Gunyenji's situation was completely unimportant. He was now acting for his own life. Gunyenji returned in a taxi driven by Lu Yuan. This time, Lu Yuan's disguise as a taxi driver was perfect. Even Reinitz didn't notice. The two of them returned to the luxurious Central Park penthouse where Lu Yuan and Lu Jin lived. Lu Jin happened to come out of the laboratory. Wu Xiaoheng was also awake and was sitting at the dining table eating. In front of him were a few T-shaped steaks that had just been roasted. They were half done. He gently pressed them with a knife and fork, and the juices flowed everywhere. They were fragrant and tender. Gunyanji was very surprised. She ran towards him with a smile. "Major General Hua, you're awake." Wu Xiaoheng cut a piece of steak and put it into his mouth. He chewed slowly and smiled at Gunyanji. Gunyanji's heart was pounding from that smile. She sat next to Wu Xiaoheng and looked him up and down. She wished she could lift his shirt and see the injury on his back. Wu Xiaoheng saw what she meant and chuckled. "When I finish eating, I'll go back to the house and show you." Gunyanji actually didn't mean anything else, but when Wu Xiaoheng said it, it seemed to have other meanings. Gunyanji's face slowly turned red. She lowered her head and rubbed the tassels on the tablecloth. Lu Yuan's lips twitched. He shook his head and went to the laboratory to look for Lu Jin. Lu Jin was wearing a white coat and observing the sections he had made under a microscope. "How is it? Have you designed the method?" Lu Yuan knocked on the door and asked calmly. Lu Jin turned to look at him. "Nianji is back too?" "Yes, I'm talking to Xiaoheng in the dining room." Lu Yuan walked over slowly. "Where did you get the steak?" It was obvious that the steak had been made by a chef. It looked, smelled, and the key was that he had good control of the heat. This was the rarest thing among Western chefs. Lu Jin said disdainfully, "Of course I ordered it from the chef of a 3-star Michelin hotel. How could I have made it?" "You know your limits." Lu Yuan smiled and sat down. He asked softly, "Are you really going to help Reinitz treat his leukemia?" Reinitz was currently the strongest opponent Lu Yuan had encountered. It could also be because Reinitz had also been genetically modified. His intuition was much sharper than the average person's. When it came to intelligence work, he was simply a talented player. Lu Jin said arrogantly, "Of course I want to treat him. However, before he receives my treatment, his life is in God's hands. After receiving my treatment, his life is in my hands." Lu Jin made a gesture of his right palm facing up and slowly clenching his fingers into a fist, as if he had already held Reinitz's life in his hands. "What do you mean?" Lu Yuan frowned. "Can you speak like a human?" "Illiterate." "I'm talking in medical terms," Lu Jin said seriously. "Do you know what real gene therapy is?" "Real gene therapy will make him open up all of his DNA to me. When I use gene therapy to treat his leukemia, I will also plant another bomb in his genes. If one day he is ungrateful and wants to go against us, I will detonate this bomb and let him die silently." This was today's big chapter update, 1836, Hand of God. They were moving tomorrow and there were still a lot of things that they hadn't packed. Today was the last chapter. There was another chapter to be posted tomorrow because the network in the new home hadn't been installed yet. In order to keep updating, this was the only way. Bear with it, I'll definitely make it up to everyone after I'm done with my work. Oh, asterisk, asterisk, oh. Moi, big shots, little angels. Chapter 1848. Lu Yuan was shocked. He quickly glanced at Lu Jin and asked in confusion, "Is it really that powerful?" Lu Jin scoffed. "Do you know what the carrier of gene therapy is?" Lu Yuan, "It's a virus." Lu Jin said casually as if he was talking about something unimportant. "Because only viruses can invade the DNA level inside human cells. The treatment I designed for Reinitz is a special virus. This virus will target his genetic defects and block the treatment, but at the same time, some of the DNA fragments carried by this virus will lurk in his genes." Lu Yuan understood and was even more surprised. "Isn't this the principle of a virus weapon? Do you remember how the large-scale special respiratory infection came about a few years ago?" Lu Jin sneered. "It was a virus weapon. It targeted certain DNA fragments that were unique to the Chinese genes. So that time the disease was most lethal to the Chinese. Although other races were infected, it wasn't as fatal as it was in China. When the infectious disease broke out, Lu Yuan had only arrived here not long ago, and he still had lingering fears about that experience. Viruses are like water and the human body is the boat. Water can carry a boat but it can also capsize it." Lu Jin continued to boast shamelessly. Lu Yuan's eyebrows twitched. "Water can carry a boat but it can also capsize it. Is that how it's used? That's not important. Anyway, it's good that you understand what I mean." Lu Jin waved his hand and looked at his experiment records. The corners of his lips curled up. There's a price to pay for everything. He provoked me recklessly and even got my hair, so don't blame me for keeping a backup plan. Lu Yuan didn't know much about this, but seeing that Lu Jin was confident, he didn't say anything else. He just said, "It's good that you're confident. Moreover, your idea is correct. Reinitz's stance is unclear, so we have to be on guard." Lu Jin thought of Reinitz's skills and decisiveness and sighed. He was no longer as exuberant as before. He muttered, "That's why I wanted to die with them. Actually, I didn't have the chance to do anything to such a person." However, with Hua Xiaoheng, Lu Yuan, and Gu Nianji working together, Lu Jin had the possibility of achieving his goal without exposing himself. However, Hua Xiaoheng was also injured because of this. Lu Jin was a little sad. Lu Yuan patted him on the shoulder and comforted him, "Don't blame yourself too much. Xiaoheng's injury looks serious, but it's not serious. For people in our line of work, it's nothing at all." Lu Jin nodded and said seriously, "He saved my life. I know that. I won't let him suffer any repercussions." Lu Yuan. He suddenly remembered something and quickly asked, "You didn't do anything to Xiaoheng's jeans, did you?" Lu Jin glared at him unhappily and pointed at his nose. "Am I the kind of person who would repay kindness with enmity? I even helped He Jichu get rid of those dangerous genes, so why would I do anything to Hua Xiaoheng? What was the reason? Where's the logic? In your heart, am I a Frankenstein without principles or boundaries?" Lu Yuan glanced at him indifferently. "You helped He Jichu get rid of the hidden danger gene? What does that mean? Does the He family know?" Lu Jin didn't expect Lu Yuan to only notice this after he said a long list of things. He couldn't help shrinking his neck and trying to change the topic. Nianji is back, right? I'll go see my girl. I haven't seen her for a few hours. I miss her. Don't try to change the topic." Lu Yuan grabbed Lu Jin's collar, his expression still indifferent. "Make yourself clear." Lu Jin pursed his lips tightly. He was determined to be a clam. He would never say anything about this even if he was beaten to death. Because he did this not because he was noble but purely for Qin Suwen. He didn't want Qin Suwen's son to become a puppet and hostage in someone else's hands one day. Lu Yuan's gaze gradually became serious, but under his sharp gaze, Lu Jin actually resisted it, which was rare for him. Lu Yuan looked at him for a while and suddenly laughed. "No wonder you helped Qin Yaoguang design the gene therapy and personally operated on He Jichu. You did it for Qin Suwen, didn't you?" Although Lu Yuan didn't see it with his own eyes, he knew that there were only 2 people in the operating room at that time. On the surface, Qin Yaoguang was the main surgeon and had an assistant. In fact, the assistant was Lu Jin or Gu Xiangguan. After the operating room door closed, the positions of the 2 of them were switched. Qin Yaoguang became the assistant, and Lu Jin was the main surgeon. Lu Jin's body trembled and he subconsciously retorted, I'm not. Don't talk nonsense." "That's right." Lu Yuan let go of his collar and patted him on the shoulder. "Actually, there's no one you can't see. After all, you 2 have children." With that, Lu Yuan quickly left Lu Jin's laboratory, afraid that Lu Jin would fly into a rage and jump up to beat him up. However, Lu Jin didn't chase after him. Instead, he looked around guiltily, then said to the camera in the laboratory, "Delete that part just now." "Delete it? Permanently delete it?" "Yes, sir." The artificial intelligence on the camera let out a cold metallic female voice and began to delete the surveillance footage. Reinitz returned to his hotel in New York. Just as he was about to take a shower, he received a call. "Boss, Mr. Li Dishi is here. He wants to see you." Reinitz's brows furrowed. After a moment of silence, he said, "Okay, where is he?" "The Hudson River." The person on the other end sent the exact coordinates to Reinitz's phone. The Hudson River was a large river that ran through New York State, and its lower reaches were just at the border between New York City and New Jersey. The river was clear, and weeping willows were planted along the river in this part of New York City. The scenery was even more beautiful. Reinitz didn't plan to take a shower, so he began his own preparations. When it was time, he took a taxi to the place where the 2 of them had made an appointment to meet. When Reinitz arrived at his destination, he found that Li Dishi was already there. He was dressed casually and wore a straw hat. He was sitting on an iron chair by the river with a fishing rod in his hand, fishing. The slender and graceful weeping willows by the river blocked most of the sunlight, and the temperature was not hot. From time to time, the wind blew from the river with water vapor, and the air carried the fragrance of grass and leaves. Li Dishi was a typical Germanic. He wasn't very tall or handsome, but he had a square jaw and sharp eyes. When he looked at people, there was a strong sense of oppression. It was obvious that he had been in a high position for a long time and was used to giving orders. However, he was still relatively gentle with Reinitz. After all, he had watched him grow up, and he was also the successor that he had carefully trained. Li Dishi had never married in his life and had no children, but he had handled many children in the past. When he looked up and saw a tall figure standing next to him, Li Dishi smiled. "Reinitz, my child, you're here. Sit." He pointed to the seat next to the iron chair. Reinitz sat down next to him and looked at the light turquoise water in front of him. He asked with a smile, "Sir, are you here on business in New York?" "I'm here on vacation," Li Dishi said kindly. Li Dishi said kindly, "I heard that you completed the task for Mr. Lorler very well, so I came to see you." Reinitz shrugged. He couldn't hear any causal relationship between the two. However, since Li Dishi said so, he would listen to him and not expose him. It could be said that a few days ago, Reinitz still had a fatherly respect for Li Dishi, but since he learned the truth about his background, this respect had completely disappeared. Li Dishi glanced at him and felt that his attitude was a little strange, but he looked extremely respectful on the surface, so he couldn't see anything strange at all. Li Dishi was also a suspicious person, so he couldn't help but ask tentatively. "According to the information we received, Gunyenji's DNA was the closest to perfect gene. Why did it become Wuxia now? I heard that you helped Mr. Lorler steal it from the KGB?" Reinitz's expression became cold. "Mr. Li Dishi, you never told me where your source of information came from. Do you think I should believe an unknown source like you, or should I believe our old enemy, the KGB?" Li Dishi hesitated. Reinitz took the opportunity to say, "There was once a great man from the East who said something like this: we must oppose what the enemy insists on. I have the same opinion. Whatever the enemy values, we have to snatch it because it must be something special." Li Dishi laughed. "Why do I only remember that the great man from the East said the first sentence? Did he say the second sentence?" Reinitz laughed. "I was the one who triggered the second sentence, but the basic meaning is the same." Li Dishi closed his eyes noncommittally and said lightly, "But the people around you said that you often disappeared alone these past 2 days. What did you do?" The corners of Reinitz's eyes twitched. "You had someone follow me?" He knew that someone was following him, but he had already shaken them off several times. "I'm doing this for your own good." Li Dishi opened his eyes and said earnestly, "You are of high status and what you are doing is very dangerous. If I don't let anyone watch you, what if something happens to you? Don't be ungrateful." "I wouldn't dare." Reinitz smiled and narrowed his blue eyes. The Hudson River reflected in his eyes was sparkling and rippling. "I know you are doing this for my own good." He stood up as he spoke. "If there is nothing else, I will go back first. I haven't had a good rest these past few days, so I am tired." "Oh? You can be tired too?" Li Dishi frowned. "Didn't you track the enemy for days and nights without rest before? I've never seen you say you are tired before. Just because I didn't say it before doesn't mean I am not tired." Reinitz looked down at Li Dishi and said word by word, "Maybe I am old, sick, and my body's functions have deteriorated." If Li Dishi looked up, he would see that Reinitz's gaze was very complicated. There was an eagerness to discover the truth, and there was also a lament for the destruction of years of familial love. There was also a determination and ruthlessness that showed that he refused to give in and accept his fate in his own hands. Unfortunately, Li Dishi had a guilty conscience and didn't dare to look up at Reinitz. He just nodded and looked at the fishing line hanging from his fishing rod on the river. "If you are tired, take a break, take a shower, and sleep. I will let you know if there is a mission." A mocking smile appeared at the corner of Reinitz's mouth. He didn't say anything else and turned to leave. The hem of his long trench coat drew an arc in the wind, covering his pair of long legs under the trench coat. He quickly left the Hudson River. Li Dishi sat by the river for a long time and caught a few fish during this time, but he released them after looking at them. For him, fishing was a leisure activity that allowed him to think and rest. When it was getting dark, Li Dishi finally put away his fishing rod and left the Hudson River to return to his residence. He lived at the Westin Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. This place was close to the United Nations building, so it was usually busy with all kinds of people of all colors. When he got out of the taxi, it was already completely dark. It was a bit cloudy at night, and the moon in the sky was like a white jade pendant covered in a veil. It made people feel like they could reach out and pick it up, so they yearned for it infinitely, but it was actually out of reach. Li Dishi didn't know how he suddenly looked up at the moon on the sidewalk. He had never been a sentimental person, but at this time, perhaps it was because he had a feeling, or perhaps it was because of his extraordinary intuition, that he suddenly had an ominous premonition about his fate. At that moment, a large truck suddenly rushed over from the road and onto the sidewalk. The crowd screamed and exclaimed, and everyone hurriedly fled in all directions to avoid the large truck that was driving crookedly. By the time Li Dishi reacted, his entire body was already flying through the air. The accident happened too quickly. The moment before he closed his eyes and fainted, he was still looking at the moon above his head. He vaguely thought that he was indeed closer to the moon. Reinitz was running in the crowd not far away. He looked back at the scene and a trace of ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. The large truck stopped, and a driver in a Middle Eastern robe got out of the car. He held a long knife in his hand and slashed at anyone he saw, so everyone ran even faster. Li Dishi hadn't been killed yet, but he was trampled to death by the fleeing crowd. The next morning Gu Nianji had just taken a shower and her hair was still wet. She sat at the dining table and ate breakfast. Lu Yuan had made her a Western-style egg pancake with a spoonful of maple syrup that was as thick as chocolate. There was a glass of warm milk and a small bowl of oatmeal donuts at hand. Hua Xiaoheng sat next to her, but in front of him was the Huaxia Empire's breakfast. There were 4 by Xuanxuan's big meat buns on a plate. They were filled with beef. She didn't know what ingredients were used, but she could only smell the unique fragrance of beef. It wasn't greasy at all, and it was also tender when it was fully cooked in the buns. There was a bowl of yellow millet and corn porridge. It had been cooked for a long time, and the millet and corn were almost melted. There was also a bowl of beef noodle soup and a few pot stickers that had just come out of the pot. The pot stickers were filled with Spanish black pork, seasoned with eggs, vermicelli and mushrooms. Not only did it taste good but it also tasted natural. Gu Nianji was about to drool when she saw it. However, these things were for Hua Xiaoheng to nourish his body. Gu Nianji only looked at them and wouldn't eat them. Hua Xiaoheng looked at her with a somewhat amused expression and pushed the plate of pot stickers to her. "Eat it. I can't eat that much." Gu Nianji beamed with joy. "Then I'll do you a favor. We can't waste food." The two of them ate happily. The sun shone through the window covered with white gauze and shone on Gu Nianji's face. Her smile seemed to have light, making it impossible for people to look away. Lu Yuan walked into the dining room and turned a blind eye to this scene. He quietly picked up the remote control and turned on the curved wall-mounted TV on the wall. Last night's news feed was playing on the TV. Last night, there was a terrorist incident where a truck hit a crowd on the sidewalk in front of the Westin Hotel. 15 people were injured in the incident. 2 were seriously injured and 1 was killed. The person who died was found to be Mr. Li Dishi, a senior employee of the German federal government. Li Dishi's work photo was displayed on the TV. Lu Yuan made a soft sound of surprise and said, "This person is Reinitz's direct superior." Gu Nianji put down the pot stickers and looked at them attentively for a while. She whispered, "What a coincidence. He was the only one who died. What's so strange about those who commit unrighteousness bring about their own destruction?" Lu Yuan and Hua Xiaoheng said in unison. This was today's big chapter update, episode 1837, Coincidence, it's all a coincidence. They were moving house today. This was uploaded in advance and posted on a regular schedule. I'm posting this on behalf of the author to ask for monthly votes and recommendation votes. Moi, everyone, little angels. Chapter 1849. Gu Nianji looked at them strangely. "You don't have to say it in unison, do you? Did you guys discuss it?" "Of course not," Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Yuan said in unison again. After saying that, they also felt awkward. They looked at each other and then looked away. Gu Nianji thought of Li Dishi in the other world. His death wasn't so straightforward. They had even sacrificed Bai Shuang's life to kill Li Dishi. Thinking of Bai Shuang, she naturally thought of Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang on the other side. Gu Nianji put down the milk in her hand. She was depressed and whispered, "I want to go back." Lu Yuan smiled and comforted her. "You'll be back soon. I miss Brother Zhe and Brother Xiong." Gu Nianji pursed her lips and whispered again. Hua Xiaoheng was stunned. So the back Gu Nianji was talking about was going back to the other world. "After we're done here we'll go home." Hua Xiaoheng put his arm around Gu Nianji's shoulder and kissed her on the forehead. Lu Yuan, he couldn't eat breakfast anymore. He stood up and said lightly, "We don't have any energy left on our side. If we want to go back we have to think about it." Hua Xiaoheng nodded. "We'll talk about this later." He naturally changed the topic. Li Dixi is dead, so Lorraine shouldn't be a problem anymore. Lu Jin happened to walk into the dining room and heard this. He chuckled and said, "Of course. They treat Wen Shui like a treasure. Although Wen Shui's genes aren't perfect, Qin Yaoguang still has some tricks up her sleeve. The gene editing she gave her was pretty good, so she can still fool these American scientists for a while." For a while? Gun Yanji frowned. That means they'll find out the truth sooner or later. That's for sure. Lu Jin sat down beside her calmly and put down his plate. But sooner or later it'll be at least 50 years, so you don't have to worry about it. Reinitz was originally a variable, but because Uncle Lu discovered the truth about his background through his genes, he's completely neutral. Hua Xiaoheng poured Lu Jin a glass of milk as he spoke. Lu Jin, like Gun Yanji, liked to drink milk. Lu Jin watched as Hua Xiaoheng's expression gradually returned to normal. He smiled and nodded. It doesn't matter even if he's not neutral. After using my gene therapy to save his life is now in my hands. Gene therapy was a double-edged sword. Sometimes, the patients didn't even know that they were also burying hidden dangers while they were treating their patients. At this moment, Lu Yuan turned around and muttered, "It's better to let him be completely neutral. We can't kill him after something goes wrong. It'll be too late by then." Lu Jin thought for a moment and nodded seriously. That makes sense. Boss Lu is really far-sighted. Then how can you be sure that Reinitz is already neutral? I just saw on the news that Li Dixi encountered an unexpected disaster, and suddenly died in a car accident caused by a terrorist attack. Lu Yuan picked up the remote control, turned on the TV playback function, and showed Lu Jin the news report just now. Lu Jin clicked his tongue as he ate his breakfast. Impressive, impressive. This game is indeed designed like an antelope hanging its horns and an elephant crossing the river. There's no trace to be found. Was this a planned game? Gun Yanji raised her eyebrows. But just now, Major General Hua and President Lu both said that Li Dixi was doomed to self-destruction. She looked at Lu Yuan and Hua Xiaoheng suspiciously. Lu Jin chuckled. "Yanji, they're both smart people. They must have seen that this was a trap and it was set up by Reinitz. They just didn't want you to know." After saying that, he sighed in a self-pitying tone and said, "How pitiful. Both of us are looked down on by them. They hide everything from us and don't tell us." Gun Yanji, she thought to herself, they just didn't tell you, but they didn't hide it from me. However, the two of them had seen through Li Dixi's death, so they chose to change the topic and fool her. It wasn't a cover-up, but it wasn't honest enough. Gun Yanji rolled her eyes and ate a spoonful of donut. She smiled and said, "That's true. You guys are in the same line as Reinitz and you're also in the same line as Li Dixi. At Li Dixi's position, there are many bodyguards around him, both in the open and in the dark. If anything happens, he will be heavily protected. But this time, there doesn't seem to be anyone around him." Gun Yanji analyzed, "In their agency, who has the ability to move the people around Li Dixi away? Other than Reinitz, there's no one else, right? You're analyzing the cause from the outcome." Hua Xiaoheng smiled and shook his head. "So your target was Reinitz a long time ago. In fact, no one in Reinitz's agency would suspect him, because he had no motive or interest to kill Li Dixi." Gun Yanji understood and gasped. "Reinitz is really decisive. Before those people could react, he had already killed Li Dixi." Hua Xiaoheng nodded approvingly. "This is indeed commendable. If it were me, I would have made the same choice. The best enemy is the dead. Li Dixi is his sworn enemy. As soon as he realized this, he immediately tried to kill Li Dixi. And all of Li Dixi's resources will be inherited by him. That's the biggest blow to Li Dixi." Gun Yanji understood. She clutched her chest and said, "This person is indeed scary, but he did this to show his sincerity, right? Now there's one less person watching Yanji." Lu Jin peeled his boiled egg and said with a smile, "When Reinitz contacts us again, we'll be able to return home." This time they waited patiently for 2 weeks. Just when they were almost desperate and thought that Reinitz wouldn't contact them, Reinitz finally called Gun Yanji again. At this time, they had just received the news that Reinitz had officially been promoted to the director of the German Federal Intelligence Agency. From now on, Reinitz would be the head of the Gestapo. Looking at Reinitz's phone number that appeared on her phone, Gun Yanji waved the phone in her hand at Lu Jin with emotion and said, "Reinitz is really amazing. He can be ruthless and tolerant. He's cold-blooded than Reinitz over there." Lu Jin shrugged and said nonchalantly, "They're two completely different people to begin with. If you treat them as the same person, you'll be the one who suffers." Gu Nianji smiled and walked to the other room to pick up the phone. Miss Gu, the last time you asked me for the key to our bureau's data storage. Reinitz's deep voice came from the phone. It was exactly the same as Reinitz's voice in the other world. Gu Nianji was in a daze for a moment, as if she didn't know what day it was. I don't think you need to go through so much trouble. I've already physically deleted all the information about you in our bureau, Reinitz continued. Is that enough sincerity? Gu Nianji came back to her senses and smiled. That's all? How did Li Dishi die? Reinitz also smiled. Terrorists are everywhere and there's nothing we can do. You have to believe me, God will give us the best arrangements. When Gu Nianji heard this, she couldn't help thinking of Reinitz, who had become a priest in the other world. But Reinitz here was completely different from the other world. Gu Nianji understood this very well. She chuckled. Mr. Reinitz is indeed sincere. Alright, since you can keep your promise, I'll also give you the thing. Reinitz's mood suddenly relaxed. The sword of Damocles, which was always hanging above his head, finally disappeared. He said excitedly, Is it the gene therapy that can cure my illness? Gu Nianji nodded. I still have to make some preparations. I'll send the information to your email at 9 o'clock in the evening. By the way, what's your email? Reinitz sent her his private email address via text message. After Gu Nianji received it, she immediately told Lu Jin to save the details of the gene therapy in an anonymous email and set it to be sent at a fixed time. At 8:45 p.m., New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport was still busy with people coming and going. More than 10 flights took off and landed one after another, and the staff at the airport control tower and customs were all working nervously. Gu Nianji, Lu Yuan, Lu Jin, and Hua Xiaoheng were sitting in Lu Yuan's private plane. They had just flown into the night sky and were flying towards the Huaxia Empire's imperial capital international airport. Reinitz was wearing a half-long trench coat. He leaned against the column in the second-floor terminal of the airport and narrowed his eyes as he stared at the plane that was gradually disappearing into the distance. At 9 o'clock sharp, Reinitz received an email in his private email. He opened it and saw that it was the gene therapy that Gu Nianji had told him about. He could take this information and find a suitable doctor for treatment. Reinitz skimmed through it. Although he didn't understand it very well, his intuition told him that this information was a special gene therapy for his leukemia. As long as he found a suitable doctor to verify it, it should be fine. This was the only way that Reinitz could accept this treatment. Because he would never put himself in an unfamiliar medical environment. Even if it was surgery, it had to be done on his territory. There were many outstanding biomedical experts in their bureau. When the time came, these people could take over. The corners of Reinitz's lips curled up as he saluted in the direction of the departing plane. He then sent Gu Nianji a text message, Bon voyage. Gu Nianji received the text message on the plane, and her face turned pale with fright. Reinitz knows we're leaving today. Hua Xiaoheng leaned over to look at the text message on her phone. He was speechless for a long time. He rubbed his temples and said, Looks like we still underestimated his ability. To be able to lock onto their plane and chase it to the airport without Hua Xiaoheng and Lu Yuan noticing anything at all, just this anti-reconnaissance ability alone was amazing. Then we can only be glad that we won the bet, Lu Yuan said lightly as he put on Gu Nianji's headphones. Listen to music and then go to sleep. Gu Nianji had been suffering for the past 2 weeks. She was afraid that Reinitz would go back on his word and not take the bait. She smiled embarrassedly and said, Everyone has their own specialties. I'm still more suitable for the legal profession. Lu Yuan smiled gently and said, Then you'll be busy when you get back. There are 2 lawsuits waiting for you. 2 lawsuits? Gu Nianji raised her eyebrows in surprise. Why didn't I know? Isn't there only Qin Yaoguang's case? Yes, including Qin Yaoguang's case. Lu Yuan looked at Lu Jin, who was sitting next to Gu Nianji. There's also a case to clear your father's reputation. Don't you want to fight it? Gu Nianji, I want to, but why now? Gu Nianji asked in confusion. Now that we've solved the external problem, we should solve the internal problem, which is the Qin family's problem. The people who knew about Gu Nianji's special physique had already been dealt with abroad. There were only Qin Yaoguang and Qin Bei in the country. Lu Yuan pulled open the curtains on the plane and looked at the starry night sky outside the window. He said lightly, These 2 things are actually the same thing. Hua Xiaoheng sat on the other side of Gu Nianji and quickly understood. Are you going to completely get rid of Qin Yaoguang and Qin Bei? Yes. Lu Yuan nodded and said lightly, The most important thing for a family is to be in order. We can't let Wen Shuyi suffer alone, right? Gu Nianji's eyes lit up as if she had been enlightened. She couldn't help clapping her hands and laughing. That's great. I finally understand. President Liu, can you stop panting when you speak? I'm about to be fooled. Who can fool you? Hua Xiaoheng teased her. If you don't fool others, everyone will be burning incense. No, I'm not that amazing. Although Gu Nianji said that, she was already overjoyed. Lu Jin, who had been silent the whole time, objected fiercely. No. You can't do that. You don't have to rehabilitate my reputation. Who's rehabilitating your reputation? Lu Yuan said leisurely. We're rehabilitating Gu Xiangwen's reputation. Lu Jin Gu Xiangwen. Gu Nianji also tugged at Lu Jin's arm and said coquettishly, Dad? Just agree to it. I don't want my father to be slandered as a murderer. And don't you think that there are a lot of questions about Lawyer Qin's death? Lu Jin's expression became even more unnatural. He turned his head away from Gu Nianji's face and said awkwardly, It's been so many years. Gu Xiangwen is no longer in this world. Why bother dragging out what happened back then? Dad, look into my eyes. Gu Nianji pulled Lu Jin over and said seriously, Dad, I heard that you were the last person to see Lawyer Qin Suwen. After that, she died of an acute illness, so her husband, He Qingjian, thought that you had something to do with her death and issued the highest warrant for your arrest. Dad, I believe you're not a murderer. Lawyer Qin Suwen's death has nothing to do with you. No. Lu Jin suddenly roared. It has something to do with me. I'm the murderer. It was because of me that she passed away. Otherwise, why would I not say a word for so many years? Otherwise, why do you think I didn't defend myself? Lu Jin's face was red, and the veins on his neck were bulging. I'm guilty. I'm guilty. You don't have to reverse the verdict for me. I'll turn myself in when I return to the country. This was today's big chapter update, page 1838, Bon Voyage. It wasn't done yet. It would take another 2 or 3 days. It was the end of the month. Let me remind everyone that you can vote for your monthly votes, moi, all the big shots and little angels. Chapter 1850. Gu Nianji didn't expect Lu Jin's reaction to be so intense. She was stunned. Sitting there all alone, he suddenly felt at a loss as to what to do. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at her and pulled the slightly lonely figure into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. He didn't say anything, but his warm embrace was the best comfort and support. Gu Nianji's heart warmed, and she snuggled closer to Hua Xiaoheng. Lu Yuan and Lu Jin were looking at each other nervously, so they didn't notice Hua Xiaoheng and Gu Nianji whispering to each other. Lu Yuan's expression didn't change, but there was a hint of anger in his voice. Do you have to be like a patient who is afraid of treatment and can't face reality? What do you mean reality? The reality is that I'm a murderer. Since Nianji is fine, it's time for me to go back and plead guilty. Lu Jin's face was livid. This time he didn't back down at all. Okay, you say you're a murderer. Then tell me, how did you do it? How did Qin Suwen die? Tell me the details. Let me tell you, if you don't make up the details, the police won't convict you just because you say, I'm a murderer. Lu Yuan slapped the armrest of his seat and lost his temper, which was rare for him. He pointed in Gu Nianji's direction and said, Why don't you ask your daughter again? She's also a lawyer, so she can help you make up a better story. Lu Jin also turned his head to look over and found Gu Nianji nestled in Hua Xiaoheng's arms. She was staring at him in a daze. Her dark, jade-like eyes were already filled with tears. Lu Jin only took a glance before looking away. He said stiffly, I'm the murderer anyway. The police need details, but He Qingjian doesn't. As soon as I show up, he'll definitely shoot me. Don't cause trouble for him. He didn't do anything wrong. Gu Nianji tried her best to hold it in, but she still choked. She quickly buried herself in Hua Xiaoheng's arms, and her tears quickly wet the front of Hua Xiaoheng's shirt. He took out a tissue to wipe Gu Nianji's tears and said dryly, We'll discuss this when we get back. Don't make things difficult for Nianji. Only then did Lu Yuan and Lu Jin realize that Gu Nianji's entire face was buried in Hua Xiaoheng's arms. From their angle, they could only see her shoulders shaking slightly. There should be a small whimper, but it was covered by the sound of the plane, so they couldn't hear it at all. Lu Jin's heart ached for his daughter, so his anger softened. He opened his mouth and hesitated for a long time before whispering, Nianji, don't cry. Dad will explain to you when we get back. Gu Nianji didn't turn around but nodded. Lu Jin and Lu Yuan both saw the back of her head move twice. It would have been fine if she just stayed in his arms, but her head was still moving around. Did she really think that he was a pillow that didn't feel anything? Hua Xiaoheng crossed his legs without batting an eyelid and pulled up the blanket next to the chair to cover himself and Gu Nianji. No one spoke again along the way. Lu Yuan turned on the TV in front of him and began to watch the news alone. Hua Xiaoheng silently thought of a plan of action. Lu Jin took out his iPad and began to program to decompress. Gu Nianji buried herself in Hua Xiaoheng's arms and smelled the scent on his body that was very reassuring and pleasant to her. Before she knew it, she fell asleep. Hua Xiaoheng simply carried her horizontally like he was carrying a child. He let her head rest on his shoulder, and her body lay on his arm as she sat on his lap. A soft and wide blanket wrapped around both of them. She was in his arms and only her head was sticking out of the blanket. Her breathing was even and steady. She weakly swept her gaze over Hua Xiaoheng's side face and chin. It was a little hot and a little itchy. Hua Xiaoheng's chin touched her warm and delicate forehead. It was as if he wasn't in the sky, but in a warm and fragrant boudoir. The two of them acted as if no one else was around, and their attitude greatly eased the tension between Lu Yuan and Lu Jin. When the plane arrived at the Huaxia Empire, Gu Nianji woke up in a daze. She had almost forgotten about the intense argument 10 hours ago. When she opened her eyes, she saw Hua Xiaoheng's beautiful and handsome profile. She narrowed her eyes and enjoyed the beautiful scenery in front of her. Hua Xiaoheng looked down at her. "You're awake? You can really sleep. We're already here." As they spoke, the plane had already come to a steady stop at the airport. Gu Nianji stretched and poked her head out from Hua Xiaoheng's side. She looked at the familiar airport outside the window and smiled. "That's great, we're finally back." She turned her head and saw Lu Jin's uncomfortable expression. The scene from 10 hours ago suddenly came back to her mind. Gu Nianji had slept for a while, and her mental and physical strength had recovered to their peak. Even her mood was at its best. She smiled at Lu Jin and said gently, "Dad, don't worry. We won't help you clear your reputation, okay?" Lu Yuan's hawk-like gaze suddenly looked over. Gu Nianji pretended not to see him. She lifted the blanket and sat up. She pulled Lu Jin's arm and continued, "Dad, don't worry. I won't say a word about you. I can still deal with Qin Yaoguang and Qin Bei, those two animals." Lu Yuan opened his mouth, but from the corner of his eye, he saw Hua Xiaoheng shaking his head slightly at him. He had no choice but to shut his mouth. However, his jaw was very square and it was obvious that he was clenching his molars. Although Lu Jin still didn't say anything, the corners of his lips curled up uncontrollably. Gu Nianji continued to encourage him. She stood up with Lu Jin's arm and walked towards the cabin door. She said, "Actually, your case is already an old story. It doesn't matter if you mention it or not. If you don't want to mention it, we won't. As long as you don't mind, it doesn't matter to me either. I just feel sorry for you. You're a great scientist, but now you've been forced to hide your identity." Gu Nianji and Lu Yuan actually had the same thoughts, but Lu Yuan didn't smooth things over. Lu Jin had always liked to disagree with him, so he immediately exploded. Moreover, Lu Jin knew that he didn't have a clear conscience in this matter, so he didn't appeal, nor did he actively take action to clear his grievances. He patted the back of Gu Nianji's hand and said in a low voice, "Nianji, Dad has indeed let lawyer Qin Suwen down. Dad is indeed at fault. Dad is not as innocent as you think." Gu Nianji thought to herself that was for sure. Otherwise, how would she have been born? Based on what she knew, Qin Suwen should know nothing about her birth. Otherwise, she wouldn't have agreed to her engagement to He Jichu. Gu Nianji's head hurt again at the thought of this. How could she have forgotten? He Jichu, the great Buddha, was still waiting for them in the imperial capital. When she, Hua Xiaoheng, and Lu Yuan had gone abroad, they had been busy chasing after Lu Jin to prevent him from doing something stupid. Therefore, they had only thrown the results of their investigation to He Jichu, as well as the photo of Qin Suwen before she was disfigured in the car accident. Gu Nianji couldn't imagine how much of an impact this had on He Jichu. How awkward it would be when the two of them met again. "It's all that B** T******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* believe things wouldn't have been so bad. Lu Jin pursed his lips tightly and looked away in embarrassment. The four of them got off the plane and quickly passed through customs. However, when they exited customs, they immediately saw He Jichu in the crowd waiting to pick them up. Because his tall and elegant figure was too conspicuous. He was wearing a straight, dark olive-green summer uniform. He didn't wear a military cap on his head, revealing his unusually handsome face. His aura was even colder and more desolate than before. His eyes, which were shaped like peach blossom petals, were no longer full of emotion. It was as if a layer of ice had condensed, and all the fire and heat were frozen at the bottom of the water. He stood there alone with his hands behind his back, surrounded by 4 tall and strong guards. The 4 of them stood around him with a murderous aura, causing no one else to be within a 3-meter radius of Hijichu. It was impossible for Gunyenji and the others to pretend not to see such an obvious sign. Hijichu saw the 4 of them coming out of customs and immediately walked up to them. "You're back? Come with me." His expression was cold. Even when he looked at Gunyenji, there was no warmth in his eyes. Was Xiaoheng, Lu Yuan, and Lu Jin stopped in their tracks and didn't say anything. Gunyenji frowned in surprise. How did Hijichu know that they were back? He was even waiting at the airport early. What did he mean by looking like he was going to arrest someone? She cursed in her heart as she took a step forward to stand in front of Hijichu. Although she was mentally prepared, she still blushed a little. She pursed her lips and smiled. "Young Master He, what's the matter? We just returned to the country and we're still jet-lagged. Can you let us go back to take a shower and have a meal first? I slept for 10 hours on the plane and didn't eat anything. I'm starving now." Hijichu glanced at her indifferently. He looked straight ahead and said coldly, "No need. I won't starve you there." He didn't want to talk anymore, so he turned around and said, "Take her away." Gunyenji and Hua Xiaoheng looked at each other, then turned to look at Lu Yuan and Lu Jin. However, this was the international airport of the Huaxia Empire's imperial capital. They couldn't do whatever they wanted, like they did in foreign airports. Gunyenji didn't want Hijichu and He Qingjian to notice her close relationship with Lu Jin. Her mind raced and she quickly made up her mind. She jogged to catch up with Hijichu, then turned around and walked backward. She smiled and said, "Young Master He, if there's anything you can ask me first, okay? I can go with you, but can Mr. Peter and the others go back first?" Hijichu stopped in his tracks and looked down at Gunyenji's rare expression of trying to please him. His fists unconsciously clenched. Feeling the sting of his fingernails, he quickly let go and put them behind his back. His gaze shifted to the door in front of him and he said calmly, "That's fine too. Come with me first." Gunyenji quickly waved at Hua Xiaoheng, then pointed in the direction of the door, then at herself and Hijichu. She then waved her hand for them to go to the parking lot. Hua Xiaoheng understood what she meant. Although he was very reluctant, this was Hijichu's territory, Hijichu's home ground. He still had Lu Jin, a bomb that could explode at any time, so he had to weigh the pros and cons. Nodding slowly at her, Hua Xiaoheng gave Lu Yuan a look. The 2 of them sandwiched Lu Jin in the middle and walked towards the exit on the other side of the airport. Lu Jin was worried about Gunyenji, so he struggled and refused to leave. Lu Yuan said in a low voice, "Nyenji has her own plans. Don't hold her back." Lu Jin rolled his eyes in anger and said angrily, "I'm holding her back. Have you asked your conscience when you say that?" Lu Yuan chuckled. "I left my conscience on the other side and didn't bring it with me." Lu Jin, Hua Xiaoheng. Gunyenji got into Hijichu's car and realized that his guards didn't get in. Instead, Hijichu sat in the driver's seat. Gunyenji looked around and asked curiously, "Young Master He, are you driving yourself?" Hijichu started the car and ignored her. He stepped on the accelerator and the car accelerated very quickly. It shot out like an arrow leaving the bow. The traffic on the highway was vast and orderly. Hijichu drove like a madman. He weaved through the gaps in the traffic and kept overtaking, and overtaking. The cars around him were originally very angry, but when they saw his license plate they all calmed down. Some even hurriedly made way for him. Gunyenji gripped the handle above her head tightly and said in fear, "Young Master He, drive slowly. You're already speeding." Where was the police car? Why didn't he catch the speeding police car? She had forgotten that with Hijichu's license plate, which police officer would dare to catch him speeding? This was a license plate with the right-of-way, just like ambulances, police cars and fire engines. The road in front of her almost became a straight line that slid by quickly. In the end, Gunyenji had no choice but to close her eyes and beg, "Young Master He, drive slowly. I'm dizzy." Hijichu's answer was to step on the accelerator again. Gunyenji, she felt like she was riding a roller coaster as Hijichu brought her back to the He family's mansion on the second ring road. The car door opened, but Gunyenji didn't come out for a long time. It wasn't that she didn't want to come out, but that she couldn't get up. Her legs were weak and she had no strength left. She had just taken a 12-hour long-distance flight, but before she could recover she was forced to take a 2-hour roller coaster. When Gu Nianji saw Hijichu, she still had some admiration and closeness to him, but now it had all been destroyed by his actions. At that moment, she deeply suspected that Hijichu was really her half-brother. She wanted to do a DNA test. Hijichu pulled the car door and looked down at her for a long time before saying hoarsely, "Why aren't you coming out yet? Are you going to sit in the car for the rest of your life?" Gu Nianji, she rolled her eyes rudely and said snappily, "I want to, but my legs are weak. What if I can't get up?" Hijichu knocked on the car door and bent over to pull Gu Nianji out of the car by her arm. Gu Nianji's legs were really weak. She was pulled by him and almost fell into his arms. She quickly reached out to push Hijichu's chest away to stabilize herself. However, Hijichu's hands were wrapped around her arm as if he was hugging her. At that moment, another car drove over and screeched to a stop behind them. Xie Qingying, who was wearing a simple white Issey Miyake suit, got out of the car and looked up to see this scene. She couldn't help but stop. "Did I come at the wrong time?" Xie Qingying stood there, hesitating to move forward. Hijichu and Gu Nianji turned their heads at the same time and looked in the direction of the voice. They said in unison, "Oh. This is today's big chapter update, episode 1839, Did I Come at the Wrong Time?" It's the end of the month, so I'm reminding everyone that you can vote for your monthly votes. Moi, everyone little angels. Chapter 1851. Oh. Xie Qingying smiled awkwardly. Although the two people in front of him had denied it, it was still particularly glaring to see the two of them speaking in unison. Gu Nianji took the opportunity when Hijichu turned to look at Xie Qingying to quickly push him away. She smiled and said, "Young Master Cousin Xie is here. Why don't you entertain Cousin Xie first? I'm very tired today. I want to go back and rest. Let's talk about what you just said another day, okay?" Hijichu grabbed her arm again and didn't even look at her. He stared at Xie Qingying and said, "Qingying, something came up at the last minute today, so I can't have dinner with you." Gu Nianji, Xie Qingying's gaze lingered on Gu Nianji's arm for a moment, but she maintained a polite smile on her face. She ran her hand through her hair and said flirtatiously, "Fine, we have dinner together every day anyway. It's fine if we don't eat together for a day." As she spoke, she opened the car door. Just as she was about to sit back down, she looked up and said with a smile, "But young Master if something happens in the future, can you inform me earlier? In order to have dinner with you, I declined several invitations from my relatives and friends." Her voice was clear, and there was a hint of coquettishness when she said this. She tilted her face slightly, and her tall and exquisite nose was exactly the same as Gu Nianji's. They were both from the Gu family. Hijichu's heart softened. When he found out that Xie Qingying was flying back to the Wuxia Empire, he couldn't think of anything else. Of course, he couldn't call Xie Qingying to cancel his dinner date. He was the one who broke his promise and let Xie Qingying down. Hijichu nodded slightly. "I understand. I'll definitely notify you in advance next time." Xie Qingying was stunned for a moment. She could barely maintain the smile on her face. She hurriedly got into her car and said to the driver, "Drive." Her car was a custom-made sky blue Chevrolet bulletproof sedan. The body of the car was tall and spacious, with a bulkiness and sturdiness unique to American cars. Compared to her exquisite attire and appearance, it presented a strange contrast of cuteness, making her look even more slender and exquisite, and the car inadvertently added a bit more style. It was rare to see a famous car and a beautiful woman bringing out the best in each other. Gu Nianji watched the car leave and clicked her tongue. "Young Master you're too careless with your words. Cousin Xie is unhappy." Hijichu glanced at her and frowned. "Why are you unhappy? Isn't she pretty happy?" As he spoke, he pulled Gu Nianji's arm towards the door. Gu Nianji was dragged by him to walk a few steps faster. She caught up to his pace and deliberately tried to make conversation to ease the tension between them. "How could I be happy?" She said that she wanted you to inform her earlier, but in fact, she was acting coquettishly and complaining. What she really meant was that she didn't want you to do this, but you said, "I'll definitely inform you earlier next time," as if there will be more of such things in the future. How can Cousin Xie be happy? Hijichu, how troublesome, he muttered. Is it necessary to think so much? He turned to look at Gu Nianji and opened his mouth to speak. Gu Nianji narrowed her eyes and smiled at him. "Young Master you guys have been having dinner together a lot lately? Looks like it's going well." Hijichu's brows furrowed even more. He walked silently for a while before arriving at the door. He pushed it open and pulled her all the way to the stairs. When they went up to the second floor, he brought her into Gu Nianji's suite in the He residence. The furnishings inside were exactly the same as when she left last time. He Jichu pulled her into the room and pushed her onto the sofa closest to the door. Then, he leaned on her and placed his arms on the armrests of the sofa, trapping her in it. He stared into her eyes and bowed as he asked hoarsely, "What the hell is going on? That photo? And why did you suddenly go to New York? Is Lorraine looking for you? You guys used Wen Shui as a replacement, didn't you?" Gu Nianji, young master He, don't you already know? Gu Nianji could tell that He Jichu's emotions were unstable, so she could only suppress her emotions and try her best to say calmly, "Wen Shui wasn't supposed to go abroad. After Mr. Peter contacted you, you instructed the relevant departments to return her passport and let her go abroad." He Jichu closed his eyes and nodded. Yes, Peter said that this was the only way to confuse the scientists on Lorraine's side. Otherwise they wouldn't let you go. The only thing that could make He Jichu relent was Gu Nianji's safety. Gu Nianji was very touched. She said gently, "Young Master He, thank you. If it weren't for you, we would have been really unlucky this time. You saved me." He Jichu wasn't fooled by her gratitude. He said firmly, "Then tell me, why did you suddenly go to New York? When you went, there were 3 people leaving the country. When you came back, there were 4 people. The one who came back with you was President Lu's younger brother, Lu Jin." Gu Nianji's expression didn't change. She said lightly, "We went to New York to track down clues from Lorraine. Lorraine tried everything to find you and you still walked right into a trap?" He Jichu was unmoved and moved closer to her. "Do you think I'll believe you?" "There's nothing I can do if you don't believe me," Gu Nianji said calmly. "Or rather, you only believe what you want to believe. If you don't want to believe it, even if the truth is right in front of you, you pretend you didn't see it." "Haha." He Jichu laughed dryly. "If only I could pretend I didn't see it. Unfortunately, I can't." Gu Nianji's heart skipped a beat, and her eyes finally moved. "What do you mean?" "What do I mean?" He Jichu straightened up and threw down a photo. "Look for yourself. What do you think I mean?" Gu Nianji looked down and her gaze fell on the photo. It was the photo she had found at the person's house in Sea City before she went abroad. It was the family photo of Qin Suwen when she was young. It was also the only photo of Qin Suwen before her face was disfigured. The little girl in the photo might not even be 10 years old, but her big, bright, dark eyes were already very eye-catching. She could see them clearly in the yellowed black and white photo. When she smiled, the childish innocence was especially obvious. It was exactly the same smile as Gu Nianji's when she was young. Gu Nianji stared blankly at the photo and said in a low voice, "Young Master He, who is the person in this photo?" He Jichu sneered. "You gave me this photo. You don't know who the person in this photo is?" "How would I know?" Gu Nianji looked up at He Jichu and frowned. "I've never seen them before and I don't know them." He Jichu crossed his arms and paced back and forth in front of Gu Nianji. His emotions gradually became agitated. "I've seen photos of these 2 older people when I was young. They should be my maternal grandfather and grandmother. But I've never seen their family photos. The photos I've seen are all composite photos of single people. Because at that time they had already passed away for a long time. My father used a lot of connections but he could only find photos of the 2 of them working at that time. So you've never seen a photo of your mother when she was young." Gu Nianji was deep in thought. "What about the person who has this photo? What happened to him? Did he tell you?" He Jichu sneered. "If he doesn't, his bones can be squeezed dry." "Gu Nianji, young Master He, you didn't do anything overboard, did you?" Gu Nianji started to worry. "He's a citizen of our country after all." "He wasn't a citizen a long time ago." He Jichu waved his hand and said coldly, "After our investigation we found out that he already has a foreign nationality. According to our law, our country doesn't recognize dual nationality, so when he obtained a foreign nationality, his Wuxia Empire citizenship was automatically lost." "Do we have to give a foreigner special treatment for a criminal in our country?" He Jichu said mockingly, "Of course he can't enjoy national treatment, and he doesn't have the right to be protected by our law." The corners of Gu Nianji's mouth twitched. "So, you did it?" "Of course not." He Jichu sat back on the sofa opposite him with a half-smile. "We have to dirty our hands if we want to torture a foreigner? Then what did you do?" Gu Nianji was very curious and she deliberately talked about it to ease He Jichu's emotions. He Jichu curled his lips. We locked him up with a group of illegal immigrants. After 2 days he couldn't take it anymore. He cried and shouted that he wanted to tell us everything. He was released so easily? Gu Nianji was dissatisfied again. He had to be locked up for a few more days. Let him reflect on what he did back then. Yes, so after he explained himself, I locked him up again. Hijichu's voice was cold and reserved, but the meaning behind his words was chilling. So he's been locked up with those illegal immigrants for so many days? Gu Nianji covered her mouth. Is he still alive? Living a life worse than death. Hijichu crossed his legs. Those illegal immigrants don't care if he's a man or a woman. If he's disobedient, they'll punish him. He's already been in the hospital several times. Gu Nianji raised a brow. And then? He was treated in the hospital and then locked up. Hijichu clenched his fists. If you knew what he did, you wouldn't sympathize with him. Gu Nianji sighed and rubbed her temples. She said weakly, I didn't agree with him. On the contrary, he must have done something unspeakable back then. Alright, what did he say he did? He said he finally convinced my grandfather, Mr. Qin Huichang, to agree to sell the land. Because he took money from Qin Bei. Gu Nianji was shocked. That's it? You believe him? There's no other evidence to prove he's lying. Hijichu spread his hands. So I wanted to ask you, how did you find out about him? And how did you find this photo? Why did he want to deal with you? But you left the country in a hurry and I couldn't get in touch with you. Hijichu's mood worsened again. God knows what kind of torment he'd endured these past few days. He couldn't get in touch with Gu Nianji, and the photo constantly reminded him of another terrifying fact. He didn't dare to think about it further, so he could only fill his work schedule every day and not let himself have any free time. Xie Qingying invited him to dinner, and he quickly agreed and immediately returned the favor. Xie Qingying saw that he was interested, so she naturally seized the opportunity. As time went by, it became a routine for the two of them to have dinner together. Until today, Hijichu's people at customs sent him a message saying that Gu Nianji had flown back to the Wuxia Empire. He then rushed to the airport to pick her up. He really had too many questions and couldn't wait any longer. Gu Nianji silently lowered her head when she heard Hijichu's words. It's my fault. I should have said it more clearly. At the time, her heart was filled with her father's safety, so she really didn't have the time or energy to answer Hijichu's questions. She also thought that giving Hijichu some time to calm down would be good for everyone. She didn't expect Hijichu to not calm down these past few days. Instead, his suspicions grew stronger and stronger. Hijichu listened to Gu Nianji's detailed explanation of the cause and effect of discovering the photo. He sighed deeply and said, I see. You discovered this person in the process of reverse engineering the Qin family's fortune. Yes. Gu Nianji nodded. The Qin family was so thorough that we couldn't find any loopholes at all, so we could only start from the party who sold the land. We studied a lot of information and finally found that only the Qin family's first pot of gold back then was problematic. It wasn't necessarily a violation of the law, but it was definitely of unknown origin. Yes, I remember my mother also investigated this matter. Hijichu's emotions finally calmed down, but perhaps it was because Gu Nianji was sitting in front of him, but she naturally had a force that calmed him down. Hijichu continued, in the end, we also found out that the Qin family's first pot of gold came from the land that my grandfather owned. However, the process of them buying the land was completely legal, and even the transaction price was higher than the market price at the time. There was no suppressing the price or fraudulent purchase. Yes, it was higher than the market price. But compared to the market price a year later, it was too low. Gu Nianji said implicitly, did your mother investigate why the Qin family suddenly wanted to buy that land? Are you saying that they might have obtained some inside information? Hijichu propped his forehead with his hand and thought for a while. Only the highest-ranking leaders knew about the construction of a special zone in Z City. I don't think the Qin family's hands could stretch so far at that time. At that time, the Qin family only owned a small orphanage and it was in the remote Z City. Also, at that time, Z City was just a small fishing village, not some bustling metropolis. In other words, the Qin family didn't have the financial resources and connections to come into contact with such high-level information. Gu Nianji pondered for a while and asked tentatively, then did your mother investigate who the person behind the Qin family was? You mean they have someone supporting them? Yes. She did, but there was no one in the higher-ups who was familiar with the Qin family, and no one had any business dealings with the Qin family. My mother even checked the minutes of the meeting at that time. My mother did a background check on every senior who attended the meeting, but she didn't find any new suspicious points. So, in the end, we could only assume that the Qin family was lucky, and the case was left unsettled. Gunyanji raised an eyebrow and leaned back on the sofa. She said disdainfully, "Do you believe in free lunches?" "Of course not." "That's right. Why did the Qin family have such good luck? I can't accept this." Gunyanji smiled faintly as she raised her right index finger and wagged it. "I think I can provide another way of thinking." "What idea?" Hijichu leaned forward and asked nervously, "What did we miss? Have you ever thought that perhaps no one in the country will help the Qin family, but what if there are people overseas?" But at that time the country wasn't open yet. Even if foreigners wanted to contact people in the country, it was almost impossible. Hijichu asked in confusion, but his heart quickly skipped a beat as he remembered something. This was today's chapter update, page 1840, "If only I could pretend I didn't see it." It's the end of the month. A reminder for everyone, you can vote now. Today is Monday, right? A reminder for recommendation tickets. Moi, everyone little angels. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.